Perfect.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming over to the grand reveal, what we've been working on for the last 2 years. I'm Andrés, the current president, co-founder of the Qualia Research Institute. You will have like Cube Flipper, amazing collaborator. To introduce the event, we're going to have Christine Peterson say a few words about Qualia Research Institute.
Yay, Christine!
So it's been, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. It's been my privilege to watch this research institute from very early on, and I've been astounded by the level of creativity in this research program. I think any of you who've been watching this will have to agree that there is nobody out there who is doing this kind of work. And it's hard to imagine something more important, right? This is how we are going to learn to quantify human consciousness, valence, emotional states, get rid of truly amazingly intense pain situations that happen to people, and also to explore the highest levels of human happiness. This is right now, this is the great mystery, right? We are so lucky to be alive today, right now. Think of what we're going to learn over the next 10 or 20 years. And it's QRI who is doing the most, so unusual, the approach they're taking, and yet also mathematically rigorous, right? I'm not a mathematician. I know we have mathematicians here.
But I don't think the mic is on.
Yeah, it's on though. Switch off, or it's
Testing.
Better.
Okay, I'm going to start over. No, just kidding. Just kidding.
Thanks, by the way, Dan.
So I just think we're so privileged to be here at this time in the history of our species when finally we have the tools to take on this problem. And we have the team at QRI. It's a super small team, but it is truly amazing what they can do with an extraordinarily small budget. And you would, once you see this research and you hear what the budget is, you're going, you are kidding me. How could you carry out research of this quality with this kind of budget? I don't know how they do it. I do know one thing, which is to take this adventure forward, we really need to step up here and get the budget up to something more reasonable. I'd say this organization deserves at least $1 million a year. I think they know how to squeeze every penny and get tremendous value out of it. If you go on the website, there's a way to donate, and you can donate as little as $25, and that's very nice. But if we need $1 million, right, we're going to have to do something different. I'm sure there are folks in this audience who can step up to something like, we need to get something like 200 people giving $5,000 or some combination. It's usually some kind of a curve, right? Some people step up with very large sums, others smaller sums, but somehow we need to come up with this $1 million because this is the great adventure. You guys are lucky. Here we are in the Bay Area. This group right here are the ones who are going to hear about this groundbreaking research. And hopefully some of you are going to make the next year's research happen. So I'm inviting you to step up and join the team.
We're going to do a quick sound thing here because this is awful.
Okay, the sound is really awful. It's true.
Yeah.
Testing. Yes, no, thanks.
We can actually quantify how bad the valence is.
This is the noise corner of the valence triangle, right?
It sounds, I don't know.
This not mic's going to work.
Can everyone hear just fine?
Sounds great.
Yes.
Much better. No, I think I made my
Hold
pitch.
close.
Yes.
I made my pitch already, which is, now, there are other ways to help QRI. If you're not a wealthy individual, if you go on the website, you'll see a long list of skill sets that they need, including things like artists, right? There's a wide variety of skill sets needed to do this work. So see if you can volunteer, great. If you don't have time to volunteer, make a donation. and help us make this work in the next year. Thank you.
So there's only
All right,
one mic that's working, it's the blue one.
Next up, we will have Scott Alexander say a few words.
Woo!
I am proud to be part of this tradition, like my father and his father before him, of being in a psychedelically decorated room in San Francisco and saying, this is the year that we finally learn to understand consciousness. That having been said, I do think QRI is amazing. I am proud to be here. I do think that if you are going to understand consciousness, you need this really rare combination of being brilliant and erudite and focused and extremely crazy. And I think that QRI is in this exact sweet spot, and if anyone is going to do it, they are. So I'm excited to see what they have to say today. Since I have this opportunity to talk to all of you, I would also remind you that all of the great research you're doing is not useful unless it gets out to other people who can use it. If you are good at explaining things, please try to explain it publicly. If you are mediocre at explaining things, please talk to your local blogger and try to help them work on it and get this out there. If you're bad at explaining things, I don't want to hear from you. So. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
And we have also Matthew Baggott, who's doing extraordinary work on figuring out how to produce the next MDMA that can be essentially, you can take as coffee, essentially. That's his mission. Hell yeah.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Matt Baggott. I've been interested in and working on psychedelics since the 1980s. When I was an undergrad at UChicago, I started, following the dead, taking acid, MDMA, and I didn't understand why no one was studying it. But that's not entirely true. Actually, Jack Cowan in the Department of Mathematics at the time at UChicago was making really simple models of visuals, basically, building on Alan Turing's idea that you could get spontaneous pattern formation if you have like an excitatory and an inhibitory process that are just sort of going at different rates or have different extents. And it seemed to explain a lot of like early visual cortex pattern formation. And I always wondered, like, do you just extend that throughout the cortex, and is that the explanation, or is there something more? And we need to like figure out, is there something more? We need people who can do self-experimentation and be just very careful in how they're observing and then make formal models. And I think that is the way forward. There's been so many breakthroughs in science, in medicine, that have come from self-experimentation. Helicobacter pylori is the cause of ulcers, is one example. Cardiac catheterization, like the list can goes on and on. If you just look at Nobel Prize winners, it totally oversamples and is overrepresented by self-experimenters. So I think that this is how we're going to get there. And so it's just an honor and a pleasure to have seen the work develop over the months and years that I've known about QRI. So please give them all the support you can. It's going to make a difference.
And now, Cube Flipper.
Thanks everybody for, everyone can hear me just fine?
I'll just back it off a little
Very
bit.
good.
Back off just a little bit.
Back off just a little bit? That's not bad. Okay, great. I should introduce myself briefly. My name is June Russell. I post on Twitter as Cube Flipper, and I have been collaborating with the Qualia Research Institute for some amount of time now. I write a blog called smoothbrains.net where I publish my independent research, but I've also had things published on QRI.org as well too, and it's been a tremendous pleasure to collaborate with all of these very fine and talented people over the past few years. Now, I should say a little bit about my background. Actually, I'm just going to time myself. So I founded out the Qualia Research Institute in, I think, around 2018, because some dear friends back in New Zealand had Andrés on a podcast. So my friend Ryan Ferris on the Cosmic Tortoise podcast, and I remember I was like working in China at the time, and this was sort of my lifeline to my friends back home, and I found it very fascinating. They were interviewing this somebody from a research organization that was taking consciousness very seriously. I sort of had psychologically dismissed that as just like an intractable, unanswerable problem in the past, and I was like very impressed and fascinated by their, I guess, like phenomenology first approach, as well as like Andrés had some very specific claims about the fact that one could access hyperbolic geometry when using the psychedelic DMT. I had no direct experience of this at the time, but this was something that I like later had the opportunity to verify. I was like, oh, this basically checks out. And like, that's weird, right? Like, my understanding of my own like subjective perspective is that like, okay, this is like bound in Euclidean, like a Euclidean realm. Like, we all inhabit a Euclidean realm day to day. Our brains exist in Euclidean space. Yet perceptual space is like something else that's weirder, that supports like tiling patterns where you can tile the plane with a septagon. And like, I was impressed that someone was like basically publishing YouTubes and going on podcasts and like talking about this in like an extreme amount of clarity. I thought this was like maybe one of the most interesting things going on the internet, and like there's a lot of interesting things going on the internet. So anyway, like when I finished that job some years later, it was probably around COVID time as well too. I found myself hanging out on their Facebook group quite a bit, and I realized, oh look, if I am to keep up with these conversations, I need to basically self-educate in neuroscience somehow. So I like, in the depths of the deep dark winter back in New Zealand, I just spent maybe 3 straight months reading like just neuroscience papers, building up enough background to be able to like basically interact with these people. Now, my background, I'm like a software developer. I've been writing iOS programs Swift my entire life, and like I'm very much not from an academic background. Like the culture where I come from is like, if you find out something interesting, you don't write a paper, you write a blog post about it, you know? Like I'm the kind of person who read like Reddit and like Hacker News all day long in my spare time. So that's sort of the way I think about things. But maybe that will have to change if we eventually like cotton onto something, or we pull some rabbit out of the hat, which is like worth writing some papers about. And I basically expect that to happen in the near future. So I eventually reached out to Andrés. I wound up doing some volunteer software development with him. And then later on, me and my best friend visited the Bay Area in 2022, and we hung out with Andrés in real life a bit. But he made a tweet encouraging people to start a blog, so I started blogging at smoothbrains.net, which I think I like chose the branding very flippantly at the time. If I'd known at the time I like would still be writing in like 3 years' time, I maybe wouldn't have chosen something so like coarse. But the gist of it is like I want to reclaim the word smooth-brained. Like I think like treat it like an ideal psychological state in which thought space is all smoothed out, like you're inhabiting a smooth rather than striated space, unencumbered by your own sort of perhaps like preferences or stuck priors. And I guess like I just like kept writing on there for a while. I like wrote a fair bit about DMT. That was sort of like some of the first few things that I wrote. That's the site. But like later on, Andrés reached out saying they were planning this set of psychedelic retreats, and I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. Like, I believe the first one. This was like the QRI HEART program. HEART stands for, if I can read off there, the High Energy Awareness Research Team. And the gist of that was we would assemble a team of like psychedelicists and scientists and mathematicians and computer programmers, and put them all in a place where they could experiment with psychedelics in a legal jurisdiction and like try to make sense of the phenomenology. And I thought this was pretty dope, basically. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So I got to attend the first retreats that we did in Brazil, which was an ayahuasca retreat. This was on a remote island of Ilha de Tinhare in Brazil. Now I should like, something I've skipped over is like kind of why we're here to begin with. Like something Andrés spoke about on the podcast with Ryan Ferris all that time ago was like we lack good models of consciousness, and there are like looming philosophical questions we'd like to answer that we kind of need to, like there's ethical decisions, like what is valence, like what makes an experience like more desirable or less desirable, and how do we engender more of those in the future, and like what are the implications of this for AI consciousness. Now, I'll get into this in a bit more detail later, but I thought this was like super important as well too, so I was like determined to be involved with this project. I thought it was pretty interesting. Anyway, so the QRI HEART retreat in Brazil, that happened in May and June 2023, it lasted for 3 weeks, and we had people coming and going the entire time. It was kind of like in the middle of nowhere. I remember like landing and first thing that happened was like, this is in Salvador, I was meant to be getting on a ferry because we had to take about 3 boats just to get to the location, and the entire street was blocked by a parade. My taxi's like all the way down there somewhere. So I was like, yeah, here you go, welcome to Brazil. That was pretty cool. Is there anything else I need to talk about there? Yeah, so like something about this retreat is it felt very in the spirit of like Ralph Abraham's work that he'd started at Esalen all those years ago. Maybe I'll get into him a little bit more later. Some of you might be familiar with the work of Ralph Abraham, Terence McKenna, as well as Rupert Sheldrake was contributing to that as well too. They were doing some work where they, actually I'll show the video in a moment, but I will talk about like 2 of the, yeah, there we go, that's Brazil. It was all very pretty and idyllic. It was wonderful. I was like swimming every morning, so that was me. It was sort of my meditation in the morning, was like getting in the ocean, getting out of the ocean. And like one of the first things I did was investigate these stroboscopic glasses, which I think we've got a pair of those over there somewhere, just to like verify, okay, so it's well established in the literature that if you view a strobe light, maybe with your eyes closed, there are like standing wave patterns that you kind of see in your visual field. And like there's been papers written about this over time, there's like websites about this. I sat down and I just like played with these and worked them through, like starting at 0 hertz strobe with my eyes closed and like trying to observe and illustrate the like standing wave patterns that we saw. And they didn't really match the literature. I could get into this in more detail, but it's on the blog, it's on the QRI Heart website. If you go to qri.heart.org, you can sort of scroll down and find it. And I'll do my best to include QR codes during this talk so we can sort of like bring these sorts if you want to like look these things up, we can do that. Now, this was a psychophysics experiment which I brought to the table, so kind of orthogonal to the claims that Andrés was making about like hyperbolic visuals on DMT. He was also publishing YouTubes at the time about, he published a YouTube about being able to access higher dimensions visually while on DMT. This is like, got this quite elaborate explanation attached to it. So I thought, okay, why don't we try to generate the kind of stimulus which could actually resolve to a high dimensional stimulus or a high dimensional percept while one is on DMT. And so this is a hypercube, or a tesseract as it is known, a 4-dimensional cube. And this is like a piece of software I wrote which is meant to be used inside a Google Cardboard VR headset. But you can maybe view it if you cross your eyes at the TV screen. This is also available on YouTube if you want to if you want to scan the QR code. The gist of it is that, like, as a very brief explanation, because I know that I'm short for time here. The idea is that when you cross your eyes at it, sure, you see a 3-dimensional image, but it's also rotating up and down in what we call the ZW plane. And so the idea is that the most parsimonious interpretation of this percept, maybe if one takes a large amount of DMT, would be that you see this resolve as an actual 4-dimensional tesseract. Now, we tried this. I know Andrés gave it a pretty serious, pretty thorough try, and this one we didn't get to work. But there's been quite a bit of thought developed in the wake of this about how one would actually develop high dimensional percepts. And I think maybe Andrés will talk about that in his talk a little bit later. So here's Ralph Abraham at Esalen. They were doing something that felt kind of very similar. They were using old mainframes to generate replications of psychedelic experiences and view them on TV screens. And so, unfortunately, Ralph Abraham passed away quite recently. I was hoping to send an email to him to talk to him about some of the research that we were doing, but I think he passed away in 2024 or so. And I'll talk more about his work later. I think there's Terence McKenna there. Anyway, so I'll skip forward past this. This was another percept which was quite successful. Now, this was developed by a friend of Andrés from Mexico City, Andrés Silva. And the gist of this, it might actually be running a little bit too fast, but is this looping? Yes, it's looping. So it's actually a video. Now, it might not be clear that it is actually animated. Sometimes we find that some people can see it when they're sober, other people cannot. But the gist of it is, if one takes a modest amount of psychedelics, maybe a half gram of mushrooms, I would find it's very, very apparent that this is animating while under the influence of, it's so much more apparent that it's animating. We think the way that this works is that you can kind of see these gestalts sort of click together, And so one of the things I was trying to do was write a piece of software that could replicate the effect of like making these kind of gestalts where the like white lines kind of join up. Now those become more dramatic on psilocybin. That's what creates the sense of motion much more strongly. And we spent a lot of time thinking about like the computational complexity of a program required to actually do that. And still to this day, a solution eludes us.
You can mention that like part of the aesthetic is finding performance enhancement in psychedelics.
Yeah, exactly. Like the kind of thing, like a state in which like the psychedelics can basically like improve the computational capacity of consciousness, which is certainly something that we're interested in. I'll come back to that eventually. This is another one we investigated. I might actually skip over this. Something I did find quite encouraging was just like how repeatable the results were. Like this is very, very casual and informal, but I could like absolutely sit next to one of our collaborators and just like discuss what we were seeing, sitting around on like, we were studying mushrooms as well as ayahuasca because they were also legal in Brazil. And we could have a very precise conversations about like, oh, I see those ringing artifacts. Oh, you see those GABA wavelets too. Oh, it's blue and yellow. Oh, it was just very, very straightforward to me. I know there's people out there who would be like skeptical that that's the case, or that it might be very sort of like priming dependent, but we didn't think this was the case. Anyway, this retreat lasted a good 3 weeks and then it came to a close and we all dissipated and sort of left for our respective corners of the globe because there were people from basically all over the show, and like spent quite a few weeks afterwards basically digesting what had happened and like speculating as to like future projects and like conclusions that we could make from this research. Now we did run a follow-up retreat in Canada, which was at the Sentinel Retreat Centre. Now this is a much more sort of like well put together location, whereas the setting in Brazil was very kind of like psychonauts in the jungle, and like collaborator, one of the visual artists, Symmetric Vision from Latvia, he was just like blasting psytrance the whole time, like it was great. Whereas the Sentinel Retreat had a larger group of people, and in the mix we also had like 2 meditators attended as well too, Roger Tisdale and Winston Bryant Scott, who were a fantastic addition to the team, and they kind of tempered almost some of the like hectic psychonaut energy that was like part of the previous retreat. And so it was actually quite fun. Spent a lot of time basically comparing phenomenological models that we had with the phenomenological models that the meditators brought to the table, and trying to find the common elements of those, because they were working with like generally very like Buddhist ontologies, or perhaps ontologies informed by Daniel Ingram, who's here today. Thanks for coming, Daniel. He's been like very much a pioneer in, I guess, like technical phenomenology of meditative states. And like even if we weren't doing, because we were using 5-MeO-DMT, even if we weren't using 5-MeO-DMT, there was just such a massive benefit from having all of those people in the same place for like, 3 weeks. Being able to exchange law with people who've been involved in psychedelic or meditation scenes for a really long time that you might not just get from just sort of hanging out on Twitter or Facebook all day long. Now, I should get just very briefly into some of what we were interested in. So like, one of the theories we're interested in investigating is the electromagnetic field theory of consciousness. There's like a few researchers have proposed this over time. One person is like Susan Pocket. I quite like some of her writing. The idea that consciousness and the electromagnetic field are one and the same. Now this is just one of like 2 popular physicalist theories. The other, of course, would be like a quantum mechanical account of consciousness, like as proposed by Stuart Hameroff. I like the in-field one because it's a bit simpler to work with, and so something we did was like 5-MeO engenders very reductive states. Like DMT feels like going on safari. You're collecting all kinds of weird, I guess, like psychological fauna per se, whereas 5-MeO tends to generate very reductive, simplistic, like almost like ground states. And maybe like something that's going on there is like, it felt like maybe we're just observing electromagnetism from the inside out. And maybe there's conclusions we can draw about like what consciousness is by making careful observations of these states. One of the initials, there we go, that's the lake, this Caslo is a very beautiful setting. And this is very representative of kind of like the big Maloka place where we were like doing our research all day long. So it was this big sort of, I guess, like nice ceremonial area in the middle. We could hang out and play around with computers and look at percepts while we were under the influence. I mean, the vibes were great in this room. It's such a nice room. Yeah, there we go. It's a first-hand perspective, kind of looking out the window, so you can sit cross-legged there. There's the 5-meo e-mesh pen that Asher Sorrell spent a bunch of time setting up and figuring out how to get precise dosages out of. It was a very, very nice and congenial setting in which to conduct this sort of research. Now, one of the first things that came out of this was we realised that, now I won't explain this in full, but the QRI, something I developed in the past, was this thing called a tracer tool by which one can access a web app and basically dial in a replication of, you might be looking at a blue bouncing ball and you can sort of configure what the tracer left behind the ball looks like. Now, most psychedelics leave a kind of oppositional coloured strobing trace of a particular colour, like 2CB, for instance, will definitely generate a blue and yellow thing, in my experience. It tends to strobe it around maybe 12 hertz or so. What was predicted in the past was that 5-meo DMT would actually generate very, very smooth, clean blues traces, and indeed one of the first things I saw when I had my first hit of 5 was the blue traces. I remember looking up at Andrés and just kind of going like that, and he knew exactly what I meant, which is I see blue traces. Now, this is, of course, this is not a study. This is not a blind study. It's a very a casual environment in which to be exploring this kind of thing. But it's certainly the kind of thing we could maybe hang a study up on. We are trying to go breadth first. There's so many low-hanging fruit to play around with. Here's an example. This is me and my friend Asher Sorrell. He's also from New Zealand. He's an animal welfare researcher who's just finished his PhD with, I believe, the Otago University. And something we were playing around with was just writing software that could generate a vibratory or a sine tone that he was listening to on headphones to try and match, turn a dial and try and match the frequency to the vibratory frequency of the 5. And we had an initial success until he sort of sat hunched over awkwardly in front of the computer while he was hitting the 5, and he made himself feel quite sick. So we called an end to that particular one. So this is just the kind of thing we were spinning up. We didn't even have vibe coding back then, if I believe. Imagine how powerful it would be with Claude Code on the go. We were just Googling random web apps we could use, or I was wanting to use Max MSP for this sort of thing. I've done audio programming in the past. Now, here we go. This is Roger Tisdale. He was one of the meditators. You can see his big diagram over there. And so something we did regularly was host these little skill set share sessions in which we shared perhaps stories or models or ideas from our respective fields. And so here is Roger demonstrating his theory of kind of the stages of enlightenment, complete with this graphic. And I always love and adore Roger's presentation style because he's very, very literal minded. It feels like attending React.js tutorial. Here he is explaining to the beings in the room how to achieve enlightenment, and just very, very dry almost. I like that kind of thing. I'm very literal minded personally. And this is representative of the kind of the vibes in the evening. I'm hanging out with, this is another artist, his name is Scry, he goes by the name of Scry Visuals online, and he was writing a shader, again, no vibe coding back then. What was this, 2023? He was writing a shader to try and represent some of the visuals we were seeing on 5. And here indeed is one of the pieces of software that he wrote. I basically sat next to him and talked to him about the parameters he was dialing in. So it's very common to see this kind of black and white, maybe it'll be strobing and oscillating sometimes, but very kind of tangled up visual field, a bit like this. Now, this is a very static visual, but something we noticed, but it would kind of anneal out over time. You might see how that visual field is basically composed of these interlocking, I guess, topological defects, which when they... Hello?
Yeah, that looks like a KT phase transition.
Absolutely, yeah. So we found the best language to be describing these terms in was something known as vector field topology, which of course was something that we'll come back to Ralph Abraham. He was very interested in this. So this is a mathematical model. This is called the XY model. So the visuals did not tend to look rainbow colored like this. This is basically a field of spins. So the phase of each spin might be pointing in a particular direction, but the adjacent spins that are next to one another want to join up to one another. So if you add a bit of heat to this, you can see there's a bit of noise in this visual, it actually jitters everything around over time, and you can see these defects eventually collide with one another and resolve. And we felt like this was very palpably what was happening on 5. I'd take a hit, maybe 2.5 milligrams, my body map as well as my visual field would start off all tangled up, and then it would anneal out over time, and you would wind up with this very, very simplistic reductive state at the very end of it. And we could speculate about all kinds of things related to like that. Maybe this is where the therapeutic benefit of 5 comes in, or maybe we're directly observing some kind of like these are the phenomenal fields. This is how I talk about this stuff. I talk about things as if we talk about qualia as if it's almost like a pre-paradigmatic field theory, like electromagnetics might have been, or electrodynamics might have been regarded before, I guess, James Clerk Maxwell and his collaborators did their research to formalize electromagnetism, or electrodynamics. We feel like there's sort of relatable qualities to that research, I guess. Now, here we go. Picture of Ralph Abraham. He wrote a book called Dynamics of the Geometry of Behavior, describing how to model, I guess, dynamic systems using, I guess, field topology a bit like this. So we're also interested, because we're interested in welfare, right? We're interested in well-being. We're interested in finding a model of valence to attach to our model of qualia. And something Andrés noted was that different topological defects tended to have different valence characteristics. Like some of them felt more pleasant than others. And so I spent a lot of time at the retreat basically talking to Andrés and figuring out how we could hang a theory of valence off the top of that observation. I published a blog post basically going into great detail about all this work. It's called 5MEO DMT, a crash course in phenomenal field topology. If you scan the QR code, you can access it. And something we found really encouraging as well too is not 1 week after this was published, there's another 5MEO research retreat that happened down in Mexico, who published a paper called Complex Slow Waves, Radically Reorganized Human Brain Dynamics under 5MEO DMT. And they were using very similar field topology models to model, I guess, the structure of EEG readings as they resolved over time. And that was it. I remember sitting on a plane. I was reading this on a plane and just mind blown that they were using very similar language to describe these things, but from the outside rather than inside. So maybe there is work to be done in the future, basically tying the inside and the outside together, so far as consciousness goes. Now, of course, that retreat eventually came to a close, but we did run another retreat in November 2024. No psychedelics involved, but this was just down at Tepoztlan, south of Mexico City. And so this was more like a kind of 2-week hackathon kind of thing. The kinds of things we were working on was basically, I think we did have vibe coding by that stage, basically playing around with Andrés' coupling kernels model, which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment, as well as things called spectral graph theory, and I had a venue in which to continue my research into valence functions. It was just incredibly valuable time. It's pretty rare to get everyone all in the same place, and something I very much enjoyed doing was walking around in the morning talking to one of our collaborators, former QRI intern, Ethan Kuntz, who basically we would go for a walk just about every morning and just talk about his models of because he's gone very, very deep in both in meditation, and I was just constantly picking his brains and talking about his models. And so this I think is the benefit of if QRI has a bit more of a runway to work with, we can spend more time putting people in the same place, and the longer we get to do that, the more odds there are that someone really pulls a rabbit out of the hat somehow. Here's just a quick example of the kind of thing I was working on. I was trying to do a model of kind of what 5MEO felt like in the body, and ignore the color because it's colorless, it's in the somatic field, color just represents phase, but again you would let the simulation run and it would the defects would anneal out over time. So I was running this sort of thing, and then I was also trying to write software that could evaluate the valence of this. And there's a lot of work to be done on top of this, but maybe that's the kind of thing we could somehow build a psychophysics experiment for if we decide we have a valence function that we want to investigate. Okay, so I should talk briefly about my own research. So I have been blogging at smoothbrains.net for the past 3 years, and I've recently wrapped up, basically drawn a line under about 3 years worth of work and published a summary page of all of that, sorting all of this into, I guess, a few short sequences. So just to make it easier for new readers to go through and check out the stuff I've done in the past. I'm very big on keeping things legible. like the job we are doing here is like trying to legibilize the illegible. And it's very important to me that we maintain very high like communication standards. At least that's what I try to get through in my writing. I want to be able to like communicate to someone who's never experienced an exotic state what that exotic state is like alike and about. Okay, so one of the first sequences I wrote was discussing, now this gentleman here, Stephen Lahar, has been a tremendous influence on QRI's thinking over the years. He was a computer vision researcher at Boston University who had some experiences with LSD early in his life, which he used to inform his models of visual processing. He was very interested, like he was working with like early convolutional neural network systems that like they could barely even run on their hardware of the day, at least to his satisfaction. But through his experiences with LSD, he like largely came to a lot of his own theories about how subjective experience work, which he's published as his like, I think you can probably, there'll be links to his website on my website. It's kind of hard to find, but he's got a very classic old school HTML website with a bunch of old write-ups and illustrations, and he's done all these wonderful illustrations of phenomenology over time, trying to communicate his models of things like indirect realism. You can see the bloke who has the model of reality in his head and the bloke who disagrees with that model over here. I was always fascinated by this one, which was illustrating the phenomenon of perspective compression. I remember encountering this and like thinking, oh, like I was riding my bike around my neighborhood every morning. It's kind of like I don't really meditate, but this is my meditation practice, I guess, and observing how like the horizon, or like the I guess like the skybox, to use video game terminology, was not in fact an infinite distance away or like an infinite focal length away. It felt like it was a finite distance away, and everything in between there and the kind of, I guess, like what you might call an egocentric point is compressed using a reciprocal law. And I thought, oh, that's neat. Okay, now I feel like I'm in the Matrix. This is like how you give someone a depersonalization, derealization episode, or maybe it's how you enlighten someone using very little technical terminology. Later I read Douglas Harding's like book on having no head, which some of you might be familiar with, which describes very similar things in like much more poetic, less nerdy terminology. So here is Lahar himself. I actually went to his house in Boston, north of Boston, earlier this year to film a set of interviews with him. Here he is with like a diorama that he made, and I haven't finished editing that video. That will happen. I've got so much work on my plate, but at some point I will like open my video editing software and edit that and publish it on YouTube. Because it's like an hour and a half of us just sitting around nerding out over like his, I guess like his real esoteric aspects of phenomenology that we're discussing. It was a tremendous pleasure to go and visit as well too. I think he was very glad that someone was still paying attention to and getting a lot of mileage out of his models after all these years. And let's get this one. Okay, so some of the next things I wrote that a lot of people might find interesting was like, I wanted to try to put these models into practice somehow. So I've written, and I tend to use a kind of common format for these, a set of like, now these are not trip reports, these are kind of like reviews of the pharmacology. I usually write about the pharmacology of a particular drug, and then I'll write about its phenomenology, and then what I will try to do is like match the two together and try to draw some original conclusions about what I think is going on there. And like, so I've done one for DMT, I've done one for ketamine, which I call WD-40 for the Bayesian brain. I found a lot of, Scott Alexander's here today. He wrote a lot of very excellent write-ups about the Bayesian brain theory, predictive processing theories over time. And I was reading these like right when I was first experimenting with ketamine during lockdown, and was like startled to find, oh, this just feels like it's suppressing the predictive stream out of the two predictive, I guess the prediction stream and the like prediction error stream, or the sensory stream. That's way too much detail to get into it. You can read about it on the blog. There's also the one about 5-MeO-DMT, and I also tried xenon at one point to see whether xenon was worth the hype. Nice. TLDR, it wasn't. It was basically just like nitrous. It actually just like, I think people just think it's interesting because it's expensive. And I mean, I'm genderqueer. I spent like, this is something that a lot of people found very curious. I spent like 3 years on estrogen. And I wrote a very detailed trip report about what I thought was going on there, because I thought there was a dearth of original content about this online, and certainly a lot of my friends are transgender and like getting into this kind of thing and maybe don't know what they're getting in for. And like, I had a lot of very positive feedback for that one. You can read about it, it's online. And some ideas of things that I might want to do in future is review designer drugs, like there's people investigating 5-MeO-MIT, aka psychedelic tofu, some people have called it. And there's other MDMA analogs where I want to sort of evaluate whether they're worth the hype. A number of people have asked if I would do a review of like semaglutide or retatrutide, which are of course very popular at the moment, and have like, people have suggested they have other interesting effects on phenomenology, like they make everything taste like ash, or they make you like very good at exerting willpower. I have been playing around with like testosterone supplementation as well too, and I think I've got some interesting things to say about testosterone, as well as like, maybe I'll get back to this. Last year, a friend of mine got me to review, like she was running a transcranial focused ultrasound, which is like a non-invasive neurostimulation technique, and she asked me if I would come to her company, or it was just like her working there in this little co-working centre here in San Francisco, asked if I would review her transcranial focused ultrasound protocols. And I think that link gets to the Twitter thread I wrote about that. I won't get into that in detail, but one of them felt a little bit like coming off on LSD, and the other one felt a little bit like methylphenidate or Ritalin, kind of, except it was like Ritalin but relaxing. It was really fascinating. And so I would love the opportunity to do more sort of transcranial ultrasound research. Now, something else I published which really did the rounds was this, this is something I've been talking to Andrés about for some time, which was how would we actually generate a visual percept which explores the computational properties of consciousness. Now, part of the inspiration of this was a blog post that Scott Alexander wrote called Universal Love Said the Cactus Person, in which I guess the protagonist enters the DMT headspace and asks a few DMT entities if they could factorize some very large prime numbers for him so that he could bring those back to our reality and then demonstrate either the computational properties or the reality of the DMT realm. Now, what I was interested in exploring was a non-coercive way of essentially solving a mathematical puzzle yourself. And it bears mentioning I was also inspired by Scott Aronson's paper, NP Complete Problems in Physical Reality, which I think will mean a lot to people who care about computational complexity and computational properties of physics. Now, I won't make any specific claims about hypercomputation because it tends to make people a little bit mad, but I can talk about what our take about hypercomputation is in more detail if someone asks me after this. The gist of it is it's a visual stimulus which you look at while you're on DMT, which I'll cut to it in a moment, which folds itself into a specific depth map when you take a dose of DMT, and the idea is that the depth map is demonstrative of the computation. And we're interested in this because we think this might be the kind of way we can explore, if consciousness is capable of doing something very different to what our digital computers are doing, that might be an interesting reason why digital sentience might be very, very different to what our experience of sentience as I guess analog computers is. Now I'll skip forward a fair bit because explaining this takes 45 minutes. I gave a presentation on this at the Science of Consciousness conference earlier this year, and I had some very good feedback from that actually. It was Suzanne Goudier who's interested in exploring whether she can build a quantum computer that's sentient. She's building quantum computers into robots, and I had some very good feedback from her around this sort of line of thinking. So the gist of it, just in brief, is that something our visual field is doing all the time is solving a depth map, which is a massively unconstrained computational problem. If you look at a sort of square kind of shape or a trapezoidal shape, there are many possible depth maps that could correspond to that. So whatever the brain is doing, it has to basically pick one particular most parsimonious depth map and do that very, very fast. Now, an example of us doing that in a way that doesn't actually involve any visual priors is this is one of those magic eye images that was very popular in the 90s. You cross your eyes at this and you see a depth map. Now, I believe this is a school of fish or something like this. I can't do it if I'm standing or off to the TV like this, but some of you might be able to do this from the angles that you're sitting at. I have to skip forward. Blah, 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 blah. Lots about Necker cubes. I've written about Necker cubes a whole lot. There's a reason my username is CubeFlipper on Twitter. This is another percept which looks really good on DMT. This definitely folds into some complicated depth maps, and so I found this is by Professor Hiroshi Kitaoka from Japan. And here's another picture. This is Scott Aronson. He was investigating whether physics could be used to solve an NP-hard problem. There's an idea that you could solve something called a Steiner graph. I won't explain the full details, but using an apparatus that uses soap bubbles to find the appropriate solution. And he actually built and tested this, and it didn't work. It got stuck on local minima, and so what I'm trying to do, this is too much detail, but I basically built an Ising machine that runs on the visual cortex, and the ground state solves a thing called a graph cut problem. And I think the one it might solve is the sparse cut problem, which is NP hard, but I'm not confident of that. I spent ages trying to find the appropriate pattern that I think would look 3D. This is where I'm going to sound really sort of nutty, but I actually found the pattern eventually on the back of a tarot deck that I bought earlier this year. And as soon as I saw that, I dropped everything and I just wrote the shader that would generate this kind of thing. The software is called Tilespace. It's on the blog. You can find it on the blog. And the idea is that I might take a hit of DMT. Some of these are constrained to go one way, some are constrained to go the other way. Now, if you take a hit of DMT, the direction, the shadow biases the way in which these kind of cube-like triangular cupola fold when the depth map forms, and they sort of are intended to kind of blossom out from these fixed points, and the full depth map that is formed across the entire stimulus, and you'll see it actually loops back on itself. It's actually on a torus, and there's 32 of these, so maybe this is the first 32-bit Qualia computer anyone's ever built. Now, I published this, and maybe 3 days later, I had a friend DM me over Signal saying, some friends of ours, or mutual friends, they've actually tried it. And the exact wording was, these are anonymized, P1 and P2 tried June's Qualia computation experiment while on DMT. Apparently it was unpleasant, and the cactus people very much did not want to factor the effing number. And I've got some more notes here. So some of the actual things that people said was, it didn't work. I felt strong resistance. It was strangely bad. It really, really doesn't want to. Not sure how to explain, but the pattern propagated like a virus. I said, oh no, I'm very sorry to hear that. I'd written this thing that people were having a bad time with it. One person said, it felt like my brain segfaulted, and it felt painful mentally for it to propagate. I was like, I'm so sorry about this. And they go, this is all right, this is type 2 enjoyable, we're glad we tried it. And so I came away from this experience. I actually spent a bunch of time playing around with it myself and working with a meditative friend who basically able to analyze the kind of sensation of torsion that arises between the two incongruous regions. And I was forced to confront the idea that I designed the first computational system that runs on human suffering. And the way I always tell this joke is then I say, there's no way I could have written something as bad as JavaScript. Anyway, so this doesn't work. I can get into the problems I see with this approach. One such problem is you can never actually prove that you've solved it in an appropriate amount of time. You have to communicate a 32-bit state, and there is a limit to the speed at which a human can communicate effectively a 32-bit number. The attractor landscape is too shallow. I find, personally, it gets stuck on local minima, but maybe I just need to apply more data. But I would love, I don't consider this a done deal. I would love the opportunity to try this in an appropriate setting. And I also have a zillion ideas about more appropriate, I'll talk at the end, more appropriate ways that we can explore this using what I think are the natural computational properties of consciousness, which I think are more frequency domain things. I have 40 minutes, I've got 20 minutes, Andres. So if this is viewed as a proof of concept to get people thinking about the kind of left field thinking that is required to derive a better understanding of the computational properties of consciousness, I'd be pretty happy with that. And it certainly seems to have done its job in that regard based on the feedback that I've been receiving. Future directions. Would love to develop a more frequency domain based thing, because I think a lot of what the brain is doing is basically doing frequency domain correlation, and that is a much more pleasant thing for it to do. And I've basically recently completed a sequence on my blog basically discussing phenomenology in the frequency domain. I'll talk about that in a moment. And I think there's a way of approaching this which can be done without DMT, it's a stimulus that resolves while sober. Because this is like the visual field is doing the same thing all the time. It's just when I take DMT, it just like bumps it way out of equilibrium somehow, and such that the computations it's performing are like self-evident. Whereas like it's doing the same thing sober, as far as I'm concerned. Or at least I think this is like, yeah, that's sort of like my line of thinking around this. Now, the two final sequences I will discuss is like there's another one I've done which is basically evaluating other people's frameworks as well as proposing some of my own frameworks, and it's been a pleasure to like build on the work of people like Michael Johnson, Andrés Gómez Emilsson, Mark Littman, Brad Caldwell, and Roger Tisdale. And I don't have Daniel Ingram's name on here. Dan was actually quite helpful. He provided a lot of very good input around one that I wrote discussing Mark Littman's work called What is a Body Mind Not?, in which I had a bizarre experience of like, after a massage session, there was just like this pattern of, I was suffering from chronic headaches, and after a massage session, this thing almost like a body mind knot that wound its way, I mean we use the term body mind knot, like a knotted sheet almost, that wound its way up through my nose, formed a funny sphere at the very center of its my head, and then kind of wrapped its way around my cranium from the inside. It felt like this thing kind of just went whiz, 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 and untangled itself. And then the day after, I just like almost felt like my face was 5 centimeters wider. It was a really, truly bizarre experience. I got to illustrate this. This is actually an MRI of my own head, so I was just like, oh, I've got that laying around. I can just like draw on top of it to provide an illustration. And when I discussed this with the meditators I knew, like Winston Bryant Scott and Dan here, the feedback I had from people was basically like, oh, you know, we've been talking about this for hundreds of years. We call this a sankara. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I bet there's people suffering from these things like all the time. How do we figure out how to resolve these reliably? Yeah, I'll continue. The final sequence I published recently was called Phenomenology in the Frequency Domain, and like the three in this sequence. And it was a pleasure to work in collaboration with Ethan Kuntz, whom I mentioned earlier. You can see he's wearing, maybe it's too small, he's wearing a CogSec sticker on his forehead because he practices good cognitive security. I know that about him. He's been a pleasure to work with. He proposed a model recently called tying together the 3 marks of existence from, I guess, like the Buddhist ontology, the idea that 3 non-negotiable aspects of existence are, and everyone translates these differently, something called impermanence, and we like the term innocence, as well as dissatisfactoriness. Ethan found a model mapping these onto something called the Fourier uncertainty principle, and you can go read about that if you like. But I've also written about like very old school, unfashionable holographic theories of consciousness, because every time I heard the word holographic, I would like cringe a little bit inside. It just like had that kind of pop science smell to it. And so when I did actually go down the rabbit hole and basically review these kind of like very unfashionable theories proposed by people like Karl Pribram back in the day, I thought, oh, actually this checks out. I think like the visual field kind of looks like a laser speckle pattern, and there are like very holographic aspects of consciousness. I basically try and steel man these like wacky old ideas, and I think I like have a case that holds water. And the most recent thing I published is analysing whether consciousness implements something called the fractional Fourier transform, which, you know, this is this beautiful graphic that was published not so long ago on Twitter by someone called Hans Chu, demonstrating how you can transform a signal from the frequency domain, from the spatial domain to the frequency domain using a pure optical system. So the wave dynamics basically give you the 2-dimensional Fourier transform in a system like this. And like, there are things that happen on psychedelics that very much resemble these kinds of effects in ways that like I'm skeptical that you could get out of like traditional like neural network models. Like, why do the wave dynamics behave like this? Why do we get like, and I don't want to get into it too much, but these sorts of things crop up in fiber optics, and you can build beam splitters, and you get these funny patterns called Talbot carpets. And it's just this way that had a lot of fun going down this particular rabbit hole. And this was worth writing a long blog post. So this is, I guess, the classic. Actually, it's like the classic linear test image, and this is the 2-dimensional Fourier transform of the test image. So you have like pixel space over here, and then each pixel over here corresponds to, like, its brightness corresponds to the amplitude of that spatial frequency. So if you look at this, you can see a smear pattern like this, indicating there's kind of a lot of lines going that way. I mean, this is not a very good example, but here's what it looks like when you actually let it run using, and you can just basically just like set up this initial signal and just run basically the time evolution, like Fresnel optics on top of it, and you get something like this. And that's what it looks like. And this is like a plausible way we could use wave dynamics to convert something from the spatial domain to the frequency domain. It would be very, very useful and very handy for the brain to be able to do this. And you can see these distinctive ringing artifacts that crop up, right? I think those show up on mushrooms. Those are like quite, here's a better example. Maybe it's not so visible on the TV, but you can see how the ringing artifacts, sort of the funny fringe patterns you get around the edges, they increase in spatial frequency with distance to the edge. And I don't think you would get that out of a neural network model. There's no reason for the brain to be doing that otherwise, unless it is perhaps recruiting like something like electromagnetism or quantum mechanics. Like the Schrodinger wave equation generates patterns like this if you just let it run over time. And so a psychophysics experiment I would love to craft is basically a questionnaire. People could perhaps take mushrooms and observe whether or not they see different ringing artifacts while they're on psilocybin. And I think this could be a very, very straightforward way to find evidence that consciousness is an optical or electromagnetic or maybe quantum mechanical phenomenon rather than a neural network-based informational system.
Maybe say the part of like you can sure train a convolutional network to do it.
Yeah, Andrés had a point that he made to me earlier, which is you could train a convolutional network to do this in principle, but there would be perhaps no reason for it to do it unless the originating phenomenon was wave-based. And like that could be useful, like maybe like when the brain is young, it starts off with a wave-based system and it learns how to replicate the wave-based system. This is something that Andrés suggested, I think, a couple of months ago. I'll just clarify this. Like, you can definitely train a neural network to, emulate, electromagnetic behavior. So you can say like, oh, okay, sure. Like if you're seeing like electromagnetic behavior in your brain, like why would that be like evidence that actually your consciousness is electromagnetic? But here's the thing: like if you train a convolutional network to recognize images, right, just like normal images. There's no reason why, if you bump it up, you would actually see like self-focusing effect or second harmonic or all these very specific technical things that emerges as artifacts of electromagnetic computers. Whereas so far what we've seen a lot in places like DMT and ayahuasca is that, hey, why is my brain generating these things that are very crisply exactly the sort of things that we see in nonlinear electromagnetic, Facebooks, textbooks, other than like if this is actually the artifacts of the medium of computation. So that's, yeah. Something I very much do know is DMT loves frequency duplication effects. Like certainly there are like wave-based effects where I'll experience something that will like double in frequency very rapidly. A weird one that happened to me a while back was like when I was using DMT, as I was entering the state, this is a silly story, this is probably not very good evidence, but it's a good story. I would spin the DMT pen around in my fingers, and then when it went around twice, I knew I was in. Like it would go around twice when I knew I'd only spun it around once. It was kind of weird. And so I'm like in the early stages of investigating like nonlinear optical simulations. Now this has been something I was doing to play around with what they call the third nonlinear coefficient. This is called the Kerr effect, and you get these funny braiding effects. And I think this actually kind of resembles a psychotic break. I can get into that later. So what is next for this? Like projects I would love to be working on? I have a gigantic to-do list. This is like, I put this on my blog recently just to show people all the kind of projects I could be working on. But things I could be doing is, actually test the tile-space DMT computational project in a formal setting and finish like a better informed version 2.0 of that project, which investigates something like frequency domain correlation. And Andrés had an interesting idea involving graph painting earlier, which I probably don't have time to explain. I would love to actually investigate the ringing artifacts or Fresnel fringing problem properly and continue writing nonlinear optical simulations, as well as there's like very important, most of all, like this is what a lot of this is building towards, is continuing with the valence function research, figuring out like, okay, do we think Mike Johnson's symmetry theory of valence is like the appropriate way of modeling valence? Or maybe we could propose other toy models along the way and compare it to that. Like I'm agnostic for what particular valence function I think is likely to be true, personally. yeah, that's a giant rabbit hole, but I think it's probably the most important thing that we could be spending our time on.
Can we make requests?
Sure.
I would like you to repair the connectivity in my broken lateral occipital lobe, where balance between low and high level vision is fucked up in autistic people.
Okay.
Thanks.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
I'm not actually a neuroscientist or a neurosurgeon, so but I'll happily talk about that in a bit.
DIY neurosurgery.
Pardon?
DIY neurosurgery.
Yeah, like I don't know. That's kind of intimidating to
Medical
me.
advice.
We did publish a paper with a neurosurgeon, so there might be some.
This is true. I'm not a therapist personally. I like to think I have a focus on like figuring out these models. Like I'm not a therapist. I could be a therapist. If like well-being comes out of this research, that's great. That's actually what I want to happen. But I don't think I'm a therapist directly, or a psychedelic therapist or anything like that. Conversation, I've got like 10 minutes left, but a conversation I had quite recently with Ethan Kuntz was basically like, are people familiar with what the jhanas are as well as the formless realms jhanas? For people who might not be familiar, they're kind of a meditative state you can enter, which is like...
knows what jhanas is? Who doesn't
I think a lot of people seem to know what jhanas are.
Who doesn't know? Okay, just a few people.
I actually can't jhana myself, so I'm probably not the right person to explain it, but Ethan was brilliant at it. So I like hold him through a very technical explanation of what the jhanas are. They're like very, very deep absorption states that you can enter through meditation that are very, very blissful. And there's 8 of them, or at least depending on who you ask. Buddhists, they all have opinions. A lot of them like differ in their opinions, and it's like quite a lot of fun to kind of like try and untangle like what is the best framework to be working with. Anyway, like I got Ethan to walk me through a very, very literal-minded technical explanation of the formless realms, which are the final 4 jhana, as you walk backwards from a cessation state through jhanas 8 to 5. And some of the conclusions that he came up with is, or through the context of this discussion, is that it's a bit like adding computational abilities as you build up a constructive model of consciousness. So one of the first things, now for context, like it's very, very difficult to, if not impossible, to absorb these things from the inside. So the observations that he's making are basically like observing, trying to do his best to observe what impact these have had on his state of being after he's exited the jhana. And so some of his inferences were that as you go back through 8765, you add the mathematical properties of continuity. And then with jhana 7, you add accumulation, like values can actually build up and accumulate. And then with jhana 6, you have this property of reflection within the state. But you do not yet have a sense of space. That gets added at jhana 5. Now, this is all like very speculative. This is all very speculative modelling. But my intuition coming away from this, actually one thing he quipped at one point was like, oh, you're jhana 6, that's where you get like Turing completeness. If anyone knows what that means. So I thought these are almost like adding nonlinear optical operations to consciousness, which add capabilities over time. There's just like a very brief table of this here. So I would love to I need to basically spend a lot of time, I basically need to develop a meditation practice myself so I can actually talk about these things in an informed manner. But I would love to investigate this in a more formal setting, perhaps with some like experienced meditators who can like verify these claims and like flesh them out significantly. I took a lot of notes during that conversation. So something I want to get out to is like I want to just show this tweet that I ran across the other day. This one here. Yeah, this is an awesome visualization I ran across. So I kind of suspect, I'm a panpsychist. I think this is actually a pretty reductive view of like how consciousness works in our universe. But I don't think like consciousness is kind of as like advanced or like sophisticated or built up or constructed everywhere throughout physics. But there might be certain like blips in which it adopts these like intense self-reflective properties which grant us like the more involved human kind of, or human or animal flavored consciousness. But perhaps what's actually going on is like states of consciousness with marginal computational capabilities are actually embedded throughout, say, like our bodies or plants or throughout the rest of the universe. And like those have their own computational properties and are solving their own problems, but perhaps maybe optimistically they're much more blissful than our states. Again, warrants more discussion, I guess.
Who tweeted that?
But a lot of them like differ in their opinions, and it's like quite a lot of fun to kind of like try and untangle like what is the best framework to be working with. Anyway, like I got Ethan to walk me through a very, very literal-minded technical explanation of the formless realms, which are the final 4 jhana, as you walk backwards from a cessation state through jhanas 8 to 5. And some of the conclusions that he came up with is, or through the context of this discussion, is that it's a bit like adding computational abilities as you build up a constructive model of consciousness. So one of the first things, now for context, like it's very, very difficult to, if not impossible, to absorb these things from the inside. So the observations that he's making are basically like observing, trying to do his best to observe what impact these have had on his state of being after he's exited the jhana. And so some of his inferences were that as you go back through 8765, you add the mathematical properties of continuity. And then with jhana 7, you add accumulation, like values can actually build up and accumulate. And then with jhana 6, you have this property of reflection within the state. You do not yet have a sense of space. That gets added at jhana 5. Now, this is all like very speculative, modeling. But my intuition coming away from this, actually one thing he quoted at one point was like, oh, you're jhana 6, that's where you get like Turing completeness. If anyone knows what that means. So I thought these are almost like adding nonlinear optical operations to consciousness, which add capabilities over time. There's just like a very brief table of this here. So I would love to like, I need to basically spend a lot of time, I basically need to develop a meditation practice myself so I can actually talk about these things in an informed manner. But I would love to, like, it took me maybe 3 weeks of my time to write that shader earlier, and I could be doing a lot more things like that. But yeah, like, Scott, who's in the audience today, published a blog post yesterday discussing a recent AI consciousness paper. I thought it was a great blog post. It was a cracker of a blog post. I think it was very, very good. And one thing he mentioned was that, like, this phrase stuck out to me: consciousness still feels like philosophy with a deadline, a famously intractable academic problem poised to suddenly develop real-world implications. Now, I mean, we're all sitting here in San Francisco. There's a lot of stuff going on in San Francisco at the moment. But one of the things that's going on is people have just developed these things called language models, which are really good, really smart, and a lot of people want to know whether they're going to be conscious or not. Now, personally, I don't like the not conscious, non-conscious frames. I think everything is conscious to some greater or lesser extent. Personally, what I'm interested in is whether, like, I guess the shapes or the phenomenal fields or what have you, the experience in a GPU running a piece of software is similar to like what we might imagine it to have, in the same way as like I might imagine that someone else's experience might be like similar or comparable to the experience that I'm having by virtue of them being a similar species to myself. We'd like to be able to answer the same questions around like computers and what their valence and what their well-being is likely to be.
Behaviorism is false.
Oh, we can talk afterwards. Also, I'm not a behavioralist. So there's another quote. This is a quote like that stuck in my head when I first was interested in this sort of thing. This is on, I've been quoting Scott a fair bit today, but I love his work. On his Tumblr, there is a quote: "There are 1,000 striking at the branches of evil for everyone hacking at the root account of the computer simulating the universe." And this like feels very much in the spirit of what I think we're doing. We're like going straight for the big problems. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say for now. I'm being on 1 hour. Thank you very much for listening. Continue with feedback.
All right, guys, so thank you so much. We're going to take a 20-minute break. There's food. Please eat. And yeah, we'll come back in 20 minutes sharp, where I'm going to be talking about empirical findings and the next chapter of QRI. Woo. And I think Cube is going to be here for questions. You're going to approach anybody. Yes.
Hey everyone, I am Daniel Ingram, and I am just so excited to be here. I flew in from Alabama basically just to be here. I had this feeling that there was something really important with you all gathering with this energy, with this incredible work, this foundational, fundamental work that QRI is doing. And I thought I should come and just be a part of this gathering. And so I think that this is just an incredible time to be alive, and so excited by this. The Qualia Research Institute, the sort of uncanny effectiveness of mathematics in physics. Like, it seemed a dream that you could possibly apply this to consciousness. And yet, through the parameterization of this experience, and the things you're about to see, and the things you have already seen, and the basic understandings of mathematics, and topology, and Fourier transforms, and linear algebra, and frequencies, and phase, that these fundamental principles should so cleanly map to so many of the aspects of psychedelic and meditative experience is just mind-boggling. And I've been dreaming of this for decades, actually. I got as far as differential equations and linear systems. Anybody? Differential equations, linear systems? We got a few in the crowd. Did anybody, when you saw differential equations, feel like you were looking at the mathematics of God? Like, am I being, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? This is a thing. And so ever since I saw that and I got into advanced meditative phenomenology, and I've thought about the patterns and the spirals and the phase shifts that you see, I've wondered how you would model that. And these kids are actually friggin' doing it. And it's just absolutely incredible. So this is just a dream come true for me to see the progress they're making in terms of really getting this done. And psychedelics have been a part of my path, but I really love deep-end meditation where you look at a light source and close your eyes and follow the colors on your eyelids. And if you do this in really high dose, which we call light casino or fire casino, you get into the chrysanthemum, and you get into this undulating scale sheets, and you get into the spirals and the tunnels and the infinite hyper, fractals and all the wild tessellations and the stuff that these are talking about. You get into some of the brilliant, white, fast flickering things, and you get into so as I'm looking at this and correlating it with the stuff we see on Fire Casino, the parallels are so obvious. And so even beyond the mapping of DMT and 5-MeO and some of the other classical psychedelics and other things, like, this is fundamental to meditation. This is revealed very cleanly by techniques over 2,500 years old. This is something fundamental about the structure of the brain. And this is the way you will reach the mainstream, because the mainstream will appreciate this, even if it will take some time. And the mainstream has to understand this if this stuff is going to fucking scale, right? Because we have a problem on this earth. We have a lot of problems on this earth. And I have this dream that the shift of consciousness, I assume all of you have this dream, that something in the shift of consciousness, that the revelations, the healings, the transformations, the insights into interdependence, the wisdom that is gained, the shifts in perspective are somehow going to help, right? And we need a lot of things that can help. And so my project is how the clinical mainstream, that's my big project I work on these days, can better understand the deep end and relate to it in a way that meets their epistemic needs. And I think mathematical formalization in the same way as fMRI and EEG and PET scans and high-grade neurophenomenology, as well as mental health outcomes and perspective studies and all that, are going to be an essential part of how in the world this stuff scales, and how serious scientists and serious thinkers and serious clinicians, and hopefully a field we will eventually create, of where we have a board of medical specialty that owns this stuff, will one day be required to study this shit in textbooks, which is mind-boggling. But that's what we're headed towards. And that will help them appreciate the potential of this to transform society and human life for better outcomes, which we obviously desperately need. So I'm so excited to say, please, 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 please support the work of QRI beyond fascinating mathematical and topological and software development and visuals. This is the way, an important part of the component of how we get the clinical mainstream and the scientific mainstream to really take this stuff even more seriously and to look at it and go, oh my gosh, there are real insights to be had there. There is mathematical depth to this. There's a tremendous amount of thought and intelligence that has gone into this, and you can see it. And it's very obvious. So anyway, so please support QRI. Please support this work that they are doing. It's just, anyway, open your hearts and your wallets, brethren, as we say in the South. And thank you.
Balázs?
One second.
Hi everybody. So my name is Balázs Szigeti. I work as a clinical data scientist. I have a dual affiliation. I both work at the Imperial College Center for Psychedelic Research and here at UCSF at the Translational Psychedelic Research Group. So if you have looked at recently the results of any clinical trial with psychedelics, there's a very good chance that I made that figure or the stats or whatever. The way I came into psychedelics was through a project called the Self-Blinding Microdose Study, and it was that citizen science project where people prepare their own placebo control. We basically made an online video how you can do your own placebo control at home and run your own placebo-controlled microdosing experiment. And it came out in 2021, and the results showed that microdosing actually is not better than placebo, and it made me extremely unpopular in the psychedelic research world. But just earlier this week, MindMed, one of the big companies in the psychedelic space, released their microdosing research results, and they also find that microdosing is not better than placebo. So kind of like the moral of the story and how it relates to QRI is that both the self-blinding microdose study was just this kind of like weird, funky citizen science initiative that was like a cool idea. It was outside of the system, but it tried to say something about that the system really cares about. And I see QRI as something like the same, just sort of like this like weird, eclectic, outside of the system, like cool little thing. And I'm not sure where it's going, but it's going somewhere which is going to be, I think, freaking awesome. So since those like citizen science days have turned into like, a boring academic researcher, and because of that, unfortunately, I don't really have any money to support QRI, but I'm happy to support them with my time and doing some analysis. And I would just really like to encourage everybody in the room to help QRI in any shape or form that they can, because what they are doing is really, really unique, and it is just really the way forward for this field, and good stuff is on the way. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and next, Chris Percy. I guess just like a few couple words is that I put up in Twitter, my neurotype. You'll see all of the stuff that I'm doing, but writing academic papers is not my neurotype in particular. And I said like, okay, like if you have like the comparative advantage is to actually kind of like bring it into academia and make it peer reviewed and acceptable in prestigious journals. Please reach out. And Chris was one of the people who reached out, and we interviewed him, and we were like, oh my gosh, yeah, I think this might really work. And since then, it's been really incredible, actually, like seeing like ideas that were like on qualia computing from 2016, and now actually seeing in philosophy of mind, prestigious journals and like making waves. So yeah, he's gonna say a few words about consciousness and digital minds and other stuff. So thank you.
So this is going to be a brief detour away from psychedelics, but I promise we're going to come back to it in force for the main event when Andrés takes up the screen. So yeah, I'm a visiting researcher at QRI. My background is more applied AI and analytical philosophy. So I don't have so much to bring in terms of the psychedelic space, and I don't have so much to bring in terms of the hard science. But I partner a lot with physicists, and I partner a lot with neuroscientists in some of this work. And what I'm really trying to do, like a lot of this work can only really be done well outside academia, but there's still something to be done going to the academic conferences, going to those journals, trying to build some of those bridges and have a bit more of a dialogue there. And that's where I'm trying to help. So some of the topics we've been able to take, like Andrés has said, they've been, one of the challenges with QRI is you might find, like in the world I normally move around in, like University of Warwick, University of Derby, maybe like academics will have one or two big ideas a year, and that's what they focus on. Andrés has one or two big ideas every single month, and there's just this enormous backlog of ideas to try and work through. Anyway, I'm sort of gradually picking through some of them. Some of the ones we've been able to get out there into one journal or another. There's some stuff around water computers, and what that teaches you about the type of consciousness that might exist depending on your view on how easy it is to multiply consciousness. We've looked at what thoughts might feel like if you're inside a neural network. We've done some stuff on the binding problem. We've looked at electromagnetic field theories. It's all sorts of stuff. It's fun. And then what I would mostly like to talk about for maybe 5 or 10 minutes is the work we're doing on artificial consciousness. So it came up a little bit in CubeFlipper's talk, and it came up a little bit in some of the discussions beforehand and afterwards. We're very focused on human phenomenology, understanding what's happening inside the human brain. But at what point do we start to have a QRI opinion or a contribution to the debate about AI minds? And we have an initiative in this space. We got started in April this year with an initial chunk of funding. And let me tell you, sort of what we believe and where we're taking those projects. So the starting point for this is consciousness matters. If we understand consciousness better, we can do better tools, better ways of living for ourselves. At the same time, this consciousness, what makes us special or what we feel special, is under threat from all sorts of avenues, but particularly from AI safety and extinction risks down that avenue. And part of the pathway to that is we are going to be sharing a world with artificial minds, but we don't know when, we don't know what direction they might come from, and we know very, very little about what they're likely to be experiencing. So there's enormous uncertainty around this whole space. And that's partly because we only have to take it on trust that anyone else that we're looking at or talking to is conscious in the same way that we are. This isn't something we can directly observe. So we need to take a theory-dependent approach to this question. And that makes it very, very difficult because our theories today aren't very good. So we've got three convictions. One of those convictions is that intuitions matter and they can change. And by that I mean what we individually think consciousness is, the kinds of systems that we think might be conscious, it genuinely matters. We're not going to be able to prove this in the short term. What we collectively think probably matters at least as much as the actual facts of the matter, what types of systems might be conscious. But these intuitions are not fixed. So I see quite a lot of surveys being done in this space which kind of describe various systems or ask people to interact with various systems and then say, do you think there's something inside? Is there something, are you resonating with something? Do you feel like there's a person there or a real emotion there? But I see no longitudinal surveys. I see no one taking the view that people's opinions update on this as we have profound experiences, maybe with psychedelics, maybe with meditation, or as we come across a new profound idea. Our opinions shift, and that's missing in this literature at the moment. The second conviction we have is that we need better theories. Even the best theories today that have had kind of the most funding and the most attention since the 80s and 90s, at best, they give a view on whether there is consciousness in a system. But they tell you nothing about where those conscious entities might start or finish, why they're experiencing pleasure or pain, what's going on inside. And just knowing, if you're a panpsychist, there's consciousness all over the place. It's a trivial statement, it's not interesting, it's not useful, we can't do anything with it. So we need to hold our theories to higher standards. We need to be clearer what we're asking for from them, and we need to nudge them or fund them to do that. Third conviction, and this is where we part ways with at least some of the work that's happening in AI minds. We believe that foundational progress is possible. Yes, these questions are very difficult. Yes, we're unlikely to get philosophical certainty on these things. But could we get to, say, a 75% scientific mainstream consensus over 10, 20, 30 years? Yes, we should be aspiring to this. We should probably be aspiring to faster than that. With an AI speed up, with big tech budgets, we should be expecting more than this. It is possible. There have been, so I won't dwell on this too much, but there have been some adversarial collaborations taking place. The brain mapping and brain simulation technology, we used to only be able to do 300 or 400 neurons in the 80s. We've just done a cubic millimeter of a mouse visual cortex. We've gone up to hundreds of thousands, 3 orders of magnitude, well within reach over 30, 40 years. Another 3 orders of magnitude. We're starting to get there, right? You put Moore's law on this. We're starting to see some meaningful progress. All of this matters for the tools we can build for humans and links to AI safety. So a couple of projects that we've got going on at the moment. And definitely come and talk to me or anyone else if you're curious here. I just want to give you sort of a one-liner feel for some of the things we've got going on. So in that space around intuitions matter, we've got a website that's collating all these arguments for and against computational functionalism, which is one of the key positions that affects and which people change their mind on regarding the possibility of certain types of digital sentience. Sea Change is a qualitative interview program. If you've ever shifted from one specific view on consciousness to another, so belief revision, not belief formation, come to me, we want to interview you, we're doing some work on that. Holding theories to higher standards. So there's a prize competition taking place tomorrow where we're one of the finalists. And we have this framework, which is 7 questions that we think these theories need to answer. And we've assessed 22 theories against it, and some of them do better than others, but there's a long way to go. With the theories we have got, though, we can start to ask, what are the indicators of valence that they recommend? Their evidence might be weak, but let's at least start with what they say. And if they haven't said it, like global workspace theory doesn't have a theory of valence. They should have one. They've had more attention than anyone in this field. They should have a theory of valence. Why don't they? They could probably come up with one. Let's get them to do that. Then we can start to do some work with it. Foundational research, we do a lot of work at QRI and within this space on binding problems. On the human flourishing side, there's something fascinating about mind uploading, this distinction between analog minds and digital minds. So June spoke a lot about the possibility that there might be an EM field substrate, at least to large parts of our visual perceptions and large parts of our cognition. Maybe also, therefore, for consciousness, and there are some theories that would ground that. Well, what does that mean for mind uploading? It's not impossible, but you need to be a bit more careful about it. And then on the X-risk side, there's some fascinating game theory around whether they think we think they're conscious, how that might change behavior. If we need to think that certain powerful AI are conscious, what's the best way to do that? Well, we probably need to study it and have a view on it. But there's also the types of theories of consciousness and the theories of ethics and theories of valence that a powerful AI might be likely to derive, and that would affect the behaviors they make. We can learn, there are things we can do to get crisper on the types of conclusions the systems are likely to draw, or at least in a slow takeoff scenario, and because at least for now they know what we know and what we feed them, we can change the types of knowledge that are available to shape those decisions. I will stop very soon. So those are some of the things we've got going already. Some of them are live, you can have a look at them online already. Some of them are being announced tomorrow, some of them are over the next couple of weeks. Things that we would like to do, that we want to do more of. So going maybe backwards this time around. So on the X-risk side, the AI safety side, the LLM attractor space, even with current technologies and moving backwards from the top level models down to nearer the base level models, on the open source ones at least, we can start to find out what are the theories of consciousness that these systems think are most credible. Does it just depend on the prompt, or are there certain theories, given what they know and what we know so far, that they coalesce around? That seems like a useful thing to know. And if the models from 2 years ago say the same as the models last year is the same as the models now, well, maybe the models 2 years from now will also be converging in the same space. Well, if we've now got a view on what these systems might start to think, we can start to map out a bit of the game theory. Tools that might come out of different theories of consciousness, I think that plays well into what June said already and what Andrés will say. I won't say more on that. The brain sim trajectory, this is what I said about we should be more ambitious about the ability to map the whole of the brain. This is within reach, within our lifetimes, and therefore will unlock all sorts of fantastic commercial tools as well, but we'll actually finally be able to test these theories in a substantial way. With people's opinions changing about consciousness and the types of consciousness that you might find in different systems, one of the experiments we'd love to do, very tractable, very doable in the short term, as people interact with LLMs in different settings, so imagine temperature high, temperature low, maybe all the way down to 0, so you get the same answer to every single prompt. Or one that is trying to act like a robot versus one that is trying to pass a Turing test. As you take people through maybe an hour or two of a few of these interactions, and then you do a little bit of explanation about the maths behind the architecture, how you build up from next word prediction to instructional fine-tuning through RLHF, and you take people up through the system prompt up to the immediate prompt. As you teach people more about the mechanics, what happens? What happens to their intuitions about conscious entities in those systems? For some people, they might believe it more, others might believe it less. Why? Why are people changing their minds as they learn more about this? So that's something we haven't started but would like to start. I will stop there. Thank you for listening.
Just really quick.
Passing peer review.
Yes. So all of this is peer reviewed.
Great.
Cynthia's Frontiers Human Neuroscience. We've got 2 under review at the moment.
Yeah.
So the 2 under review at the moment are collaborations with neuroscientists, looking at the binding problem both explaining why a perceptron model can't solve it, so computational neural networks struggle with this particular concept, and another one looking at quantum mechanical solutions to it.
Awesome, thank you.
But it is a slow journey, unfortunately.
Oh, it is.
Too many of these took 1 to 2 years to come out. But
Relatable.
yeah.
Can you go back to the different projects you had at the end?
Well, we'll do a little Q&A at the end. I don't want to hold up Andres any further, but definitely up for discussing it. I feel like you're getting a glimpse here into Andres' head as well.
Yeah, that's always scary.
It tells a lot about.
You want me to hold that?
Sorry, guys.
Sorry.
Everybody good? All right, so we are actually premiering a video like right now. So it was like timed for like 7:30. So like right now on YouTube, there is an ongoing worldwide release of the following video. What you just saw is a collection of videos made with our Oscil editor, our dynamical model of psychedelic vision. It's a way of taking these bizarre, high-energy visuals people report on psychedelics and expressing them as actual dynamical systems. Once you can parameterize an experience like that, you can compare it across substances, across doses, across people, and eventually tie it back to underlying neurodynamics. Let me backtrack a second. Have you noticed that if you wave your hand around on psychedelics, there are these lingering impressions, little copies of your hand that stick in the visual field for a moment before dissolving? Or how lights leave trails, or motion has this strange persistence? Everybody sees that, but almost nobody thinks, wait, you could actually parameterize this. You could try to model it with levers. That line of thinking is where this whole project really began, with a tracer tool back in 2020. Although, to be completely honest, the original motivation was to find the optimal parameters for secretly communicating with people on LSD, what we call psychedelic cryptography. But that's a topic for another video. And then it goes on. I recommend you check it out. Now it's available on YouTube for everybody to see. Okay, so there is this wonderful quote by Daniel Kolak, who wrote the book I Am You. Are people here familiar with the concept of open individualism? Okay, so this is like the philosophically rigorous view, or grounded philosophical view that we are all one consciousness. He's kind of like a rigorous academic analytic philosopher, and he has this like 600-page book, which is all about explaining why we're all one consciousness. Really dry academic work. But there's like this quote, I mean, it's fantastic work. I actually disagree with his arguments, even though I agree with the conclusion. But he has this wonderful quote, I'm just going to read it, which is like, whereof one cannot speak, thereof be silent. The seventh and final proposition of Wittgenstein's Tractatus is to me the most beautiful, but also the most errant. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof write books and music and invent new and better terminology through mathematics and science. Something like that is how I would put it. Or, if one is not predisposed to some such productivity, thereof look steadfastly and directly into it forever. And I think this is actually a very good kind of aesthetic pointer. It's like one of the leading, aesthetics, research aesthetics of the Qualia Research Institute is epistemological optimism, right? We're the sort of people who, when people say like, oh, that was impossible to describe, we go and say, hold my DMT paper, right? It's like, like, no, it's not impossible, like you just lack the frameworks, like the mathematics, the concepts, the background assumptions, etc. So, I'm maybe the best well known for like mapping out the geometry of the DMT space. DMT space according to my own categorization. This is like 2016 work. There's been a lot of additional work since then, but approximately, there's like kind of these like 6 levels, and they come with like very distinct geometry. Like one of the early things that I started to do, like I would be like, for example, in Mexico at a psilocybin retreat, I would like close my eyes and wait for like symmetrical patterns to form in my visual field. And I trained myself to actually be able to name the mathematical patterns. So they're called the wallpaper symmetry groups. And so I was quite acquainted with like, okay, yeah, psychedelics can produce any of these like 17, wallpaper symmetry groups. And then when I started exploring DMT, there was one time when it's like, okay, well, I'm in these like palace, very beautiful palace, actually somewhere around the waiting room level. And then I noticed, oh my gosh, the walls are tessellated with heptagons, and there's no distortions. It's like a very clean heptagonal tiling, full of morphing patterns and shifting geometries. But it was like sevenfold symmetry. And then I came down and I realized, hold on a second, that's impossible. Actually, that should be impossible. Mathematics say there's 17 wallpaper symmetry groups and heptagons are in none of them. Hold on a second, this is hyperbolic geometry. I was experiencing hyperbolic geometry. And with that insight, I was able to really reinterpret and then predict actually like aspects of the experience with a ton of explanatory power, as the careful balance of different factors of the experience essentially come together in such a way that they're actually able to unfold your phenomenal field and add extra negative curvature to it. Now, aesthetically, and I think this is a good metaphor here, is like the work that we're doing at QRI, really, you can think of it as like casting a very wide net, right? Like finding all of these like super talented people, in all kinds of fields, really kind of like finding, okay, where are the very large effect sizes that we can find? The really interesting, especially bizarre things that show up in these exotic states of consciousness, and then, point all of our intelligence and, energy and resources there, as opposed to wasting, hundreds of thousands of money of grant money on something that may or may not work out. That was one of the foundational concepts behind the Qualia Research Institute, high energy awareness research team. I'll give you kind of like a contrast. Of course, like academia is really important, and there's like a lot of really valuable things that happen in academia. I would say, for example, like the data analysis techniques, the neuroimaging techniques, the doggy-ish behavior of actually, like gathering like 20 subjects in this like 7-hour protocol, like you absolutely need that. But look at the actual, data and experiments that are actually being run in like, top leading, psychedelic science labs. And you've got to wonder, like, really, like, are the people who conduct this research actually like have tried these substances? Are they really like focusing in the right way on these? I'll give you an example. Like there's this really well-funded study, hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially more, which was looking at candy flipping, combining LSD and MDMA. And it is very, very widely known, very widely known in the community that MDMA changes the LSD experience, right? It should be kind of obvious, but it really is like, okay, for some people LSD is like freaking scary. You add a little bit of MDMA, it's like, wow, okay, now I can handle this and have like self-insight and love and like, okay, so how did they study these? They took, participants off the streets, okay, you don't have much experience with these compounds. You give them either LSD or MDMA or LSD plus MDMA. And then you give them some like validated, standard, surveys for how to quantify psychedelic effects. Which, you know, to be fair, they can distinguish between placebo and psychedelics. They definitely have that going for them. So can my grandmother. Okay. But you know what? In their conclusion, they actually arrived at the conclusion that MDMA doesn't change the LSD experience because we don't see a statistically significant difference in these surveys, right? So you've got to say, like, okay, was that good use of money? Like, actually, you arrived at an incorrect conclusion? Like, that it should be really fucking, really freaking, I should say, really freaking obvious. So, for example, like at the Brazil retreat, sorry, I don't, anyway, at the Brazil retreat, we just like sat down and in like, you know, everybody there has tried LSD and MDMA and LSD and all kinds of combinations. And in 20 minutes, we came up with a survey that, according to us, will actually be able to distinguish candy flipping from LSD. And like, you know, we want to essentially partner with like research labs to actually make it happen. And we have some pilot data that suggests like, yeah, actually this is like way better of a separator, right? So like, this is like, hey, actually having like smart people who have had these experiences and inform, you know, what kind of research you should be doing, where to point is really important. Okay, does anybody know what this is? Does this ring a bell?
Is it the part of the heart logo?
No. This is a Venn diagram. It's a Venn diagram for 7 sets. So we all know Venn diagrams for, you know, 3 sets. So my claim, to some extent, right, is like I have kind of like a pet peeve when people say like, oh, we brought an interdisciplinary team to focus on these tasks, because I've been part of interdisciplinary teams, and like usually what happens is, you know, the mathematician ends up all of the time just like explaining, you know, what matrix multiplication is to the linguist, and you know, the anthropologist like spends all the time, you know, like very basic ideas of how to conduct field work. And in the end, like no interesting work is done, right? Like even though you have like the seal of approval, yes, interdisciplinary team is like no, you have to pay attention to the details. Now, what do these people actually know? Can you actually make them vibe together and actually, you know, produce a gestalt? Like actually, okay, like the understanding of the group is actually better when they're together than otherwise. And so, you know, since starting blogging like in 2014, although my first few blogs were like, yeah, blog posts were like very not that good or interesting, but really I would say that, yeah, from 2015 or so, because of, you know, putting out these things like, okay, how to secretly communicate with people on LSD, hyperbolic geometry of DMT, etc., I've kind of like assembled a community of like people who are actually this intersection of being like, you know, technically proficient, really smart, sane individuals, a ton of meditation skills, you know, with philosophy of mind interest, neuroscience, and significant overlap between these disciplines, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm a neuroscience expert, but I don't know much about meditation. Like the people that we have recruited for these texts, you know, they tend to be, you know, like maybe 4 of these things all at once. Maybe they're not so good as the other ones, but there's kind of like a threshold where like the gestalt of the collective understanding actually becomes like palpable and it becomes meaningful. And that is really what I cultivate. And I really have like really stringent standards for these, for like what caliber of individual in these technical skills, you know, do I actually bring to these retreats? It's a very high bar. And you know, it was a dream of mine since 2015 or so, like, hey, can we actually bring together all of these people? And okay, like Q Flipper talked a little bit about that. You know, this is like the sort of output that came out of this, you know, like the systematic assessment of DMT versus 5-MeO, or attention and awareness. Very hands-on research. You know, here, for example, is like Symmetric Vision, who is a world-class psychedelic replicator. He in particular, he doesn't use code. He uses things like, you know, Adobe After Effects, Photoshop, a bunch of things like that. But he's like extremely good at it. I mean, his renditions, for example, have like, you know, like how you can add effects in like Adobe After Effects, like the sort of thing that he puts online in like 4K in YouTube for people to watch. They have like, you know, 120 layers, you know, and they're all synchronized and they properly work together, and it's, you know, just like really high quality work. And it's like, okay, yeah, this kind of person is like ideal for this sort of retreat. And you know, there's an aspect of like kind of like hanging out with people of this caliber while you have access to psychedelics in a legal context. You know, you don't have the paranoia like, okay, is the police gonna, you know, break through the door at any point? You also know like you're taking something, you know, safe, and you know, there's medical assistant 20 minutes away if necessary, and stuff like that. But like, it is like, okay, like you have this really fast very powerful feedback loop that you can just like literally sit next to one of these persons and, you know, if sharing the state, like you're both on 2 grams of mushrooms, for example, and you look at like, you know, hundreds of interesting videos and animations and you comment in real time, and we recorded our audio, for example, as well. So we have like, you know, so much data that we collected and we have analyzed through like, you know, AI and also sifted through it manually. And one of the things that we did also, you know, this is, as I mentioned in the nearly just released video, psychedelic cryptography. So like I actually, you know, we created this contest. We knew this would work because there's like some pilot work that we had done that was successful. But what we did actually was create this contest where people would submit images and animations that contain, according to them, secret messages that you can only decode in the right state of consciousness. And well, we had access to ayahuasca and mushrooms, which is what we tried at a wide number of doses. But here's the thing, nobody in the team knew, except for one, so a couple of these submissions, there was one person who knew. But like I made sure that like for pretty much all of the submissions, nobody in the team knew actually what the secret messages were supposed to be. And so we actually got to, you know, organically validate this. Like we would take like ayahuasca or mushrooms and like spend literally half an hour as a group looking at these images. Like, oh, yeah, do you see anything? Like, is there any secret information, any kind of interesting encoding? And, you know, of the submissions that we got, overwhelmingly most were like really poor quality, I have to be honest. And their encoding schemes weren't that interesting. You know, things such as like, well, what if you warp an image and you add kind of extra twists? Is like, can you decode that better on LSD? Probably not. These, by the way, you know, this is a bit of a challenge, but this one, there's actually a snake hidden in there for you guys to come, you know, later and try to find it. It's pretty difficult to find, but once you see it, it's like it's there. Like I'm not kidding. There's a snake in there. But it's like, yeah, these sort of tasks were like, okay, like you maybe wonder like, hey, will this work better on psilocybin and so on? I mean, usually not. Like usually psilocybin will impair kind of like visual processing, but not for everything. And so we did find like some of these animations that you actually, you know, it was amazing seeing in the group. It's like, oh my gosh, you're reading that? Yeah, I'm reading that. And then like we would go to the side. It's like, yeah, what did it say? And like, yes, okay, like we confirmed, or like we wrote it in a paper so that, you know, not influencing each other. At least some of us did. Do you guys know this program, QI? The like very famous British. So, you know, they actually had like the QRI and psychedelic cryptography as part of like one of their quizzes. So this is really going mainstream. Also, yeah, this is actually what this one says in particular. It says like, we love you, and it's like, yeah, a bunch of aliens. But you know, this is actually becoming mainstream. Actually, there's like a psychedelic artists who now are like adding psychedelic cryptography to their psytrance performances. And according to them, you know, they might say something like, "Can anybody read what's in the screen?" And you know, a few people raise their arms. Of course, what we want to do with this, you know, for the next retreat, is you know, like a properly constructed like psychophysics test for these, and try a bunch of parameters, find the optimal ones for like different substances, different doses. But okay, like to really give you like a taste of the aesthetic of these. Do you guys know this image? I'm sure you have seen it, although maybe you don't know what it means or why it's there sometimes. But you know, like if the TV network goes down, oftentimes they will put this up. It's like, why? Why would they put this image? Well, think about it. You see, there's like high spatial frequencies over here, low spatial frequencies. There's a variety of colors, shapes. Well, this is essentially kind of like trying to sample the state space of possible inputs in such a way that you very quickly can tell not only if something is wrong, but what. Right? Like if this becomes very blurry, it's like, oh, the encoding is not able to like handle the high spatial frequencies. Or if this is gone, it's like, oh, maybe it just like has the high frequency edges. So you can very quickly kind of like tell what is off about the system. Not only that something is off. And that was like a really important kind of like a guiding aesthetic for us, right? Like we did not, as is traditional academia, select one experiment where we have no idea if it actually looks different on LSD versus placebo. No. We constructed hundreds of parameterizable visual inputs. You know, all of these produce like really interesting visual effects. This one's in particular constructed by Andrés Silva, a good childhood friend of mine who lives in Mexico City. And you know, you can think of them as they're like kind of like state space samplers. You know, like you play with these, and very quickly you can produce a wide variety of, you know, interesting visual effects. But there's like two things about these. Right? Like you can save parameters, you can edit the code, you can put back the parameters that somebody else saves, tweak them and save them again. But then in addition to that, all of these things have a ground truth, right? Like, we know how these images are constructed, right? Like, as much as I absolutely love things such as like deep dream and amazing, the wonders of large language models and so on, I don't think they really fit ideally for like really understanding consciousness from the bottom up, because you don't know what's happening, right? Like, you don't actually know like how deep dream truly works. Of course, we know the algorithm, but like, hey, like what's actually happening at the level of like the propagation of activity in the neural network? Whereas like the stimuli that we created and we explored on these retreats, all of them have mathematical formulas that we know really well. Like, we can really deeply understand actually what's going on. Okay, so I don't know if you know like T. Ferry. She was part of the retreat. T. Ferry is like a famous, very early 90s like Arrowweed kind of like psychedelic warrior. If you only read one of the articles of the Heart retreat website, I would actually recommend this one, which where she talks like in what way this retreat is like actually completely different than anything else that she's done. And I think also, yeah, she has like really balanced, kind of like really grounded take on actually, what we did is not just kind of like flowery. It's like, no, actually, like, she confronts like some of the challenges we also encountered. But, getting a little bit into the details, and so what I'm gonna do now is kind of walk you a little bit through some of the high level insights we got from these retreats that I don't think we had been able to get like individually or like, just talking online. There really was something about like the collective intelligence of the Gestalt, like really very much so. And it goes as follows. So like something early on that was pretty obvious in the 5MEO retreat was the significance of vector fields as an important kind of like data structure to make sense of phenomenology. This is from Asher Arataki, his pseudonym. Sorry, one very quick thing about pseudonyms is like one of the reasons actually we took so long to publish these things is because, and maybe some people may not agree with this, but as the head of the Qualia Research Institute, I thought it was like very important to do, which is like everybody who went to the retreat like signed an NDA for the purpose that we would all write up all of our experiences and have a chance to review them before we actually put them on online, because there's like privacy concerns. And so like to be able to attract the kind of people with the strange neurotypes that can actually do this research well, you have to really accommodate them in a number of ways, in terms of like working styles, management styles, and one of those is actually privacy. Like one of the key things that we allow as part of our retreats is to have full privacy. Like you participate in this, and you can either submit with your name or pseudonym or even anonymously, right? So we made sure that like everything would be kind of properly reviewed by each other to make sure we would have a positive pass. And okay, so like Arataki is, for example, like a pseudonym, and CubeFlipper is a pseudonym. And then one of the key things, is like vector fields. So on 5MEO, there's kind of this like sense of like energy flow in your field. We can say like, is anything really flowing? Well, at the very least, there's a gradient. You can tell there's kind of like a derivative. Like there's like if you place your attention around here, it's gonna be dragged somewhere else. And if you can like start mapping, okay, how is my attention dragged in different ways in my energy body, which is a phenomenological term, not making any ontological claim here. You will see that the valence of the experience tracks the topological defects. Essentially, whether there are things such as, hey, like the energy is concentrated in one point, or you have like, yeah, I mean these are called topological defects, and these metaphorically is kind of like the moment of ego death on 5MEO DMT, where like let's say if your body has a lot of these kind of like pinch points or like saddle points and vortices, as you come up on 5MEO DMT and you melt, the various topological defects find each other out and they start to cancel each other out. And at the very end, there's usually just one big topological defect. And if you go past breakthrough level, that topological defect itself cancels out with something that subjectively feels like it's outside of you. Yes?
Might be worth specifying that diagram in the middle there corresponds to an experience of pressure which Arataki experienced while he was on 5MEO DMT, which corresponded to like quite severe and painful lower back tension. So that's what all those arrows pointing into the topological defect, the attractor in the center, that's what that's describing.
Yes. Yeah, and you can see like the gradient here that essentially, the experience starts pretty unpleasant in this case. Yes. But then when this topological defect actually like went outside and everything became aligned, the valence flipped very significantly. So we found like, hey, there's actually like a very significant relationship between the topological defects and the valence. And yes, you know, this slide also keeps looking. Okay, but like, here are like some of the like animations that came from the retreat. You know, these are from Scry, for example. Scry, his talent is like you can describe to him any sensation or experience or intuition, and then in half an hour he will have a shader, you know, code that produces some visuals, and he will say like, hey, is it like this? You give them feedback, you know, and within 5 minutes you have like another iteration, right? So this is like super fast iterations, and this probably was like, you know, after a couple hours of working together as a team, you know, kind of like giving feedback on each other. It's like, yeah, it was like this, was like that, like not quite, like the color was different. And this texture, you know, this kind of like expanding waves that are very smooth and soft, and you have like these topological defects that come and go and sometimes, you know, kind of appear and disappear like particle antiparticles. We all said like, yeah, 5-amino DMT feels like that. There was like strong agreement. You could say, well, there's like biases. Maybe you could say like, hey, we all have like a zero mindset or something like that. Are we maybe all deceiving each other? We would, of course, love kind of like completely independent replications, and some of the methodologies will show you actually overcome that problem. But my honest answer is like, I don't think so. I mean, it is sort of like when you know, look at a visual illusion with somebody, it's like, not everybody gets a visual illusion, but it really, like if something kind of like moves in a visual illusion book, it's like, is that because we self-suggested ourselves? It's like, no, there's like a reliable psychophysical like effect in here. And it's the same with these things, you know. The level of consensus that we found ourselves having was like really high, right? Like we did, like you would never get consensus on, for example, which entity you met on ayahuasca, because maybe this person met their grandmother, this person met a clown, whatever. But that's like semantic content. If you talk about like the actual texture of the experience, sometimes you will have like very, very high level of convergence on people's descriptions, especially if they have the vocabulary and the inclination to work on this. These are like, yeah, 5-amino DMT replications. You know, like somebody asked me, hey, what is my favorite color? And I said, the white, black, transparent, rainbow superposition you only get on 5-amino DMT. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of like this, but not exactly. You really need 5-amino DMT to know what I'm talking about. But everybody in the team was like, yeah, did you see the color? Yes. And like, essentially, yeah, this is kind of an attempt. Like there's something about like transforming your field of consciousness into kind of a crystalline lattice with Voronoi patterns that are competing with each other. And as you increase the dose, they become like more of them, and they're more chaotic. But then there's usually a moment in the experience where they actually anneal and come together. And yeah, you get kind of these like really intense, like nonlinear optical phenomena that it really feels like, hey, like this is actually a liquid crystal matrix, and there's like a laser going through it, and it's not like I've known this physics before. Like it really seems like you're actually tapping into the underlying physics of the medium of computation. Here's like another replication. This is actually like a sense of expansion on 5-amino DMT. It's very, very common. If you hit a certain dosage on 5-amino, you get this really powerful, expansive sense. And here's the interesting thing too, is like if you're resistant, it becomes deformed and asymmetrical, and that feels bad. So actually, if you can really let go, like with no body mind knots, and take a sizable amount of 5-MeO, and you get that very clean expansion, that is like super high valence. Like that's way better than an orgasm by far. Here's another thing. You hallucinate symmetry on 5-MeO DMT, and also this seems to be related to the valence of the state. So there's this was like based on a particular, pattern that we were showing. The actual pattern, interestingly, is not symmetrical. It has, on purpose, I was showing this pattern with like a few imperfections. And we all notice that if we hit a certain threshold of 5-MeO DMT, you wouldn't notice the imperfections. It's like as if you were kind of hallucinating the pattern being more symmetrical than it is. And this is the part that, in this particular case, Rudolf Balzers was replicating. It's like, okay, he's coming down from 5-MeO, and you have these like expansive symmetrical waves coming from the center. And then at some point you come down and they break. And it's like, oh my gosh, the pattern was never symmetrical to begin with, right? You can imagine this is somewhat related to maybe the feeling of like oneness and God and infinity. It's like you're hallucinating this like perfect symmetry between you and the universe and everything. And then you're coming down and you realize, okay, actually there's a here, there's a there, there's a before and after. All these things become actually, they inhabit your world simulation through symmetry breaking. Well, okay, so that's like the raw material, right? So like the raw material, the evidential base, really high quality phenomenology, replications. But what about like theory? What about like insight? How is this regenerated? And why 5-MeO feels one way, DMT feels a different way? So since then, we ran the retreats, and then I was obsessively, going through the data, going through the the recordings, and thinking, okay, like, what kind of like mathematical model we would actually be able to replicate this in such a way that if you tweak the parameters, you will actually be able to experience, visualize any of these. I arrived at like something I would call like geometrizing the Kuramoto oscillators, with this concept called coupling kernel. I put the equations here in case anybody's curious. You can read about it. We also have like an article about this on QRI.org. But I will show you kind of like what they generate and why they're promising, and then I'm going to show you some empirical data that we have collected on this. So, this is one of the early kind of like very prototypey type of work that I was doing like last year. So you see the levers there. I mean, essentially, when all the levers tend to be kind of like to the right, that means that most of the oscillators are like positively coupled with each other, meaning that, and each square is an oscillator that is kind of like a clock that is moving and is moving through the color wheel. A positive coupling means that whenever there's like a difference between the color that an oscillator is in and its neighbors, it's going to try to kind of like subtly adjust that difference and become more similar. If the coupling is negative, each oscillator will try to be different, the opposite color. If for one oscillator is like 6 p.m., for the other one is like midnight. They try to be opposite. In this case, I'm showing how like, okay, as you go up to the right, everything becomes positive, and then you get kind of this like seizing effect. Everything synchronizes. That, to a first approximation, is what we think like 5-MeO is doing, but it's a little bit more tricky because it's happening in a super generalized way. It's not just in your visual field. We think this is happening all across your world simulation. And to do that, we explored the following. So this is like another version of the same idea, except that a bit more general. So this is a 1.5 dimensional system. It's kind of these like branching structures. The idea is that, the waves can also travel through this geometry, right? Like it doesn't have to be a flat surface. So think about like the vibrations in the vascular system. On 5-MeO DMT and on DMT is not just your visual field that's like flickering and having these crazy oscillations, it's also your vascular system. You can feel it. I mean, this has not been verified, but I would say that I'm fairly confident there's like a really strong effect size in that direction. And as you can see, these would be kind of like a pattern. These would be like the 5-MeO pattern. So when 5-MeO DMT, it feels like your whole vascular system, boom, kind of like aligns, and you get these like really powerful waves that are fully synchronized. Whereas on DMT, you get kind of this crazy breaking of the vascular system into different modules, where each of the modules are vibrating in their own characteristic way. And you get this phenomenon we call competing clusters of coherence, where like in your body you have like different clusters, each of them finally attuned to themselves, but not necessarily attuned to the rest. So, this explains why, maybe on DMT a patch of your visual field is full of hexagons, and it feels like, okay, I'm contacting the god of hexagons over here. And then he's like, okay, there's like this other part of your visual field is full of squares, and then they're competing with each other. They're trying to colonize your experience, hexagons versus squares, right? And oftentimes it's actually really unpleasant, where like these like incompatible mathematical structures try to colonize you with like you paying more attention to them. That competition is like very dissonant and jarring, and so it's like not necessarily like good valence therapy. It may be, DMT has its applications, but it may not be like ideal for that. Here I'm just kind of like showing an additional generalization. So the principle is exactly the same thing. There's kind of like you're modulating these coupling dynamics, but you're applying those coupling dynamics to a network with a specific network topology that may replicate or mirror different aspects of your experience. So this would be kind of like schematically, and I'm gonna come back to this in a moment, but are you guys like familiar with the concept of like distilling a neural network distillation? Okay, awesome. So it's like, okay, like you have this very messy, neural network with lots of layers, and you want to compress it. You want to create a smaller network that does essentially the same thing. you can think of a lot of kind of like what we're doing here is a kind of like distillation of like the vibratory ecosystem behind an experience. It's like, I don't really care like whether you're GABA neurons or serotonin neurons or dopamine neurons, how they're like put together at the lowest level. What I care about is like, okay, when you look at like the level of maybe a cortical column or like something a little bit larger, what is the kind of like self-organizing principle that is emerging at that level? And like maybe actually in that sense, at least for like macroscopic oscillations, the very low level details maybe don't matter as much. What matters is, are you getting the right self-organizing principle that explains your phenomenology? So methodologically, okay, so we arrived at, okay, like we think this paradigm has a lot of explanatory power. How do we test it? So we applied this paradigm to a whole bunch of different, like network topologies. For example, like, using like a log polar transform to replicate retinotopic mappings, superposition of harmonic waves, very similar concept, the tracer tool. And then what we did is the following. So the methodology was a survey, a pretty comprehensive survey. Actually, it had quite a lot of questions. In each of the questions, we would show a pattern, for example, this specific kind of tracer effect. And then we would ask the participant, first of all, they have to tell us like which drugs they're really familiar with. You just go, which drugs have you taken like more than 10 times, for example. And then we show these patterns and we say, rate from 0 to 10, how LSD-like this pattern looks like, or how DMT-like this pattern looks like, right? So all of a sudden we have like all of these different types of patterns generated with different self-organizing principles, and we get like, ratings from like advanced psychonauts that tell us how much does this remind them of LSD versus how much does this remind them of DMT. And the thing is, actually the data that we gathered is essentially very consistent with our predictions. So, for example, these are like the most DMT patterns. They should be animated, but yes, it would be kind of too busy. But these like checkerboard patterns with like rich and intricate color, anti-color like interactions, or like the wave dynamics in the 1.5 dimensional network, or the hierarchical Kuramoto, the tracer tool. All of those are essentially this like Mexican hat kernel where like everybody wants to be opposite to their immediate neighbors. But you see what I'm driving at? Like, I am saying maybe DMT's effect is very simple. The thing that is complex is us. Like, we have all this very rich network topology with the vascular system, the visual cortex, the surface of our skin, and DMT might actually just be modifying, the balance between 5-HT1A, 5-HT2A receptors. Arthur over there is like, very deep into that stuff, and collaborating on this for a publication. And effectively, yes, like the effect might be really, really simple. It's us that are complex. Whereas 5-MeO-DMT might be roughly pushing the entire system towards, hey, everything and everybody in your world simulation wants to synchronize with everything else. Along the way, you actually get some chaos, but at the peak, you get these like perfect kind of synchronizations of the entire visual field, the entire experiential field, where you disappear. If everything becomes, as Daniel probably knows very well, if everything becomes perfectly synchronized, you disappear, right? And 5-MeO-DMT does that at a high dose, and it's like very clear, like the way, at least subjectively, the way. Okay, see, this is two of the strongest, most rated patterns for these two substances. So 5-MeO-DMT, these very large black and white waves that correspond to what happens when you drive a system through this like coupling kernel of maximum synchronization. DMT, complex, hierarchical, Mexican hat-like kernel everywhere. Just a couple more things. This, for example, this is like generated with a replication tool, the oscillator. I mean, maybe this is not too surprising to some of you, but this, DMT, LSD, 5-MeO-DMT. We predicted, the results would be like that statistically you would actually kind of observe a pattern like that, and the data seems to confirm it. Now, the data is messy, and we're actually going to recruit Balázs to actually analyze it more thoroughly than the data analysis that I have conducted. So, the effect sizes are not too large yet, but we're perfecting the survey. By the time we actually publish these, I do expect we will have like a pretty clean separation of the different substances. There's one pair that we have not been able to separate in the data set at all, which is like LSD and psilocybin. LSD and psilocybin are just very similar in the reported visuals, which is interesting because when I talk to people, they disagree. They like people who have a lot of experience with LSD and so it's like, really? They look the same, but our data just doesn't separate them very well. But LSD and DMT, yes, there's like some items, there's some visuals, there's like, yes, it's distinctly much more DMT-like than LSD-like. This, by the way, is not in the literature, which I find mind-blowing, right? Like, there is a lot of things in the literature of like, okay, like, maybe MDMA is not very visual, and LSD is very visual, but there's nothing that says, okay, the visuals of DMT versus the visuals of LSD, are they different? The answer is yes, they're very different, if you know what to look for. DMT versus psilocybin, also you can make a separation. Yeah, as I was saying, like psilocybin and LSD, it's very hard to tell them apart. Casina versus jhana, you know, they do produce kind of like different patterns. That's another thing that we were asking for, is like rating these patterns by similarity to fire casina, similarity to jhanic states of consciousness. Here's a gigantic correlation table between the judgments of all of these different participants and all of these substances. You know, as you can see, like the correlation in ratings, LSD and psilocybin is like 0.43. There is, you know, some difference, but it's not that large. All of these will be, by the way, like posted very soon on QRI.org. But this is the grand reveal for you guys, so you guys get the preview. Another very significant one, like you might say, for example, yeah, like interestingly, we got like 5-MeO-DMT and fire casina have some interesting overlap. 5-MeO-DMT and ketamine. But like people wonder, like, is 5-MeO-DMT a psychedelic? Actually, in our group, that's a contentious question because maybe 2/3 of people in the team after the Canada retreat, they were saying 5-MeO-DMT is not a psychedelic. Like, we should not describe it as a psychedelic because it's very misleading. It's like describing ketamine as a psychedelic. It's like, yeah, there's some overlap, but they're different, really different state spaces. For those who's curious, yes, Q Flavor.
At least one person did try to describe it, who definitely is very familiar with anesthetics, is a psychedelic anesthetic.
Yes, psychedelic anesthetic. My reconstruction, there's a blog post you can find in Qualia Computing from 2019 or something, where I was looking at like receptor affinity profiles of different substances and using this data science technique called non-negative linear regression, where essentially it's like, okay, it's like a linear regression, but where you constrain the coefficients to be positive. Like they have to be, because you cannot take a negative amount of a certain drug, right? Like, so if you're gonna reconstruct a drug in terms of other drugs, you need to have like only positive, you know, real coefficients, no imaginary coefficients either. And then here's the thing. If I were to kind of like say, what is 5-MeO-DMT in terms of other substances? This is gonna sound very crazy, but you actually need 4 substances to reconstruct it. You need DMT for the super fast frequency hyperdimensional feel of it. You need nitrous oxide for kind of these like lower of the register anesthetic kind of like full body feeling. And literally 5-MeO-DMT is another thing that we found is an anesthetic to a significant extent. Like if you have like some pain in your body, or an interesting something that we observed is like right after taking 5-MeO or like coming down, we could like walk easily on kind of like these like spiky rocks without feeling pain in the, whereas like if you're on, you know, like mushrooms, you actually feel it more. It's more unpleasant. So wait, an anesthetic? A psychedelic that is anesthetic? Okay, so that's like number 2. Number 3 is MDMA. 5-MeO-DMT produces, at a certain dose, really powerful kind of like explosions of loving kindness. It's a really, really powerful kind of like heart opener, very similar to MDMA in some ways. And poppers. Do you guys know what poppers are? I mean, yeah, like if you yes.
I want to second that low dose 5-MeO absolutely does feel like animal nitrates.
Yeah. I mean, it has kind of this like body flushing effect and kind of like this kind of like all your vascular system becomes kind of expanded and vasodilated and off the record, maybe I'll probably say this, but it is absolutely incredible with sex. Multiple reports on that from different people. Okay, so how do we kind of like show the value of, okay, like this survey? This is just a data analysis interesting technique, which is, okay, like imagine, for example, using the data set that we have collected, a quiz, which is, you took a mystery drug yesterday. You don't know what you took, right? Somebody gave you something, I don't know what it was, you took it. Don't do that, by the way. And then like, the next day is like, what did I take? So you do this survey that they show you like different animations of different visual effects, and you rate, okay, how similar is this to what I experienced? If you use that data set and you apply, some machine learning, in this case, logistic regression, but like it works better with like random forest, for example. If you apply a machine learning technique to that, then, with 10 questions that you ask, you can get, let's say, like 30% accuracy. This doesn't sound that much, but consider that we were sampling between 7 different substances, right? Like, so the just guessing would be like a 14% chance of, getting it right. But yeah, with like a quiz with like 30 questions, you can get up to like, 40% accuracy. We are fairly confident though that we can dramatically improve these effect sizes. Like, I do think like by early next year, we can probably actually have a survey that like gives you like an 80% accuracy, especially for distinguishing between like, say like DMT, LSD, and 5-MeO-DMT. Like that trifecta, we're fairly certain you can find like really strong kind of distinctions. Just another method. Oh yeah, and just like another kind of like methodological aspect here is I manually rated all of these different visuals by specific properties. Things such as like, hey, like, are there low spatial frequencies present, or are there high spatial frequencies present? What is the consonance, dissonance, complexity? Are the colors present in this image? And you see there's like strong correlations here. I mean, like one of the strongest one is DMT and high frequencies. And that is something, I've been talking about this since 2016. I've said like, yes, when a hippie tells you, hey, DMT is a high frequency state of consciousness, right? Like, it's so easy to be super skeptical. Like, what do you mean by that? But if you think about it in terms of things such as like, okay, the tracer effects on DMT, they're like really fast. Whereas LSD is kind of more soft, right? It's like, you can actually tell what is the flicker frequency of different substances. And clearly substances are quite different on that domain. I guess like it's something also Daniel has spent a bunch of time like categorizing the frequencies of different meditation states, right? It's like, I don't know, like this insight level, something like 30 hertz vibrations appear and stuff. And it's like, yes, you need that level of detail, but with this type of research, this can come up organically out of the data. And indeed, DMT is a very high frequency phenomenon. You like very fine edges and like very fast oscillatory dynamics, and the data reflects this. Again, we will improve the data set and the survey significantly, so I'm pretty confident we can boost these correlations too. Okay, so the next thing I will talk about is the tactile visualizer. So what I showed you, and all the tools that I've shown you so far, are to visualize the visual field very naturally, right? But can we extend these to actually model tactile sensations? There are like really important reasons to do this, and that is because we believe that, for example, chronic pain, in many circumstances, is kind of this like oscillatory braided pattern of like the systems of coupled oscillators in your body. Because sometimes, for example, for some people, chronic pain, they may have like a chronic pain in their leg for 20 years. They take a high dose psilocybin experience, and the pain is gone. There's emerging evidence of that. Or for example, with like phantom limb pain, there's like also psilocybin seems to help significantly. And it's like, why? Like everything is the same, but like why going through this annealing process? Like what changed? And we think, in mathematics of coupled oscillators is this concept of like braided patterns. I'll show you in a second. With the tool that we are constructing and prototyping and conducting surveys on, we can replicate, like with a lot of detail, the kind of like deep phenomenology of different states of consciousness. For example, this is a recent replication of like what it feels like to take a big dose of 5-MeO-DMT in the body, not in the visual field. You see the person is like starts out kind of these like very dysregulated, it's kind of like, oh, I feel anxiety, it's kind of like yuckies, and then you take 5-MeO, like boom, all of your vascular system becomes like hypercoherent. All of a sudden there's this big phase transition that you can actually really characterize in terms of like spatial temporal frequencies. The spatial frequencies of 5-MeO-DMT are, for example, fairly large. You have kind of these like very large waves in your body. And pretty much everybody in the team, plus minus a few, agree that 5-MeO-DMT has that characteristic. Whereas the left one is, okay, how DMT feels like in the body. No, sorry, this is what acid feels like in the body. Okay, so getting into kind of like practicalities, the vision with this. So Maybe you saw this viral video recently. So this is somebody with tardive dyskinesia associated with Parkinson's and also antipsychotics. And it's very unpleasant. You have kind of this like constant wobbly notion and you just can't sit still. But if you apply a 128 hertz vibration, vibroacoustic therapy as they call it, he calms down immediately. Right? It's like, what is happening here? Now, this hasn't been replicated. You know, there's a few anecdotes online, but there's not like, we know this for sure. Like, clearly it works for somebody. But what is happening there? But like, we believe that with this kind of like process of like dynamic system distillation of the self-organizing principles that are happening at the level of oscillations in the body, you can figure out, okay, which self-organizing principles here, if you were to add an exogenous 128 frequency vibration, would it calm down? Like, I think like at the level of granularity that we're playing with, you can actually make like really educated guesses. And not only that, really from the ground up, construct completely, you know, novel revolutionary therapies for, hey, what kind of waveform, what kind of like patterns of stimulation and light and vibration and, you know, which chemicals to take, to specifically target in a surgical way what is going wrong in you as a system of coupled oscillators. I mean, like, we really want to move past this like paradigm of like, hey, you're depressed, you probably don't have enough happy molecule in the brain, right? Like, if we want to actually say, no, hey, like depression, anxiety, so they're oscillatory disorders of different types. Which oscillations, which network topologies are going wrong, and can we specifically surgically go in there and actually fix that? And you know, this is, you know, also maybe an offhand comment is like even, you know, people in this tower are like working on like neuromorphic computing. For example, this is you know, I don't know if have you guys ever hear like neurogrid? I took a course at Stanford when I was in grad school, where they have like these chips that are like simulating like 1 million neurons, and it's this like massively parallel analog system. Now there's like better things. I mean, maybe some of you may know, like for example, like Extropic and all the memes that come from that. But I mean, essentially, there's like people in this tower are developing like amazing, you know, hardware that has these. Is using, in a sense, like the energies and the self-organizing principles of the universe itself in order to do compute. The problem is people don't know what to do with it. But we think, like, you know, if we actually can like distill the self-organizing principles that correspond to different, you know, body disorders, it's not going to be kind of like a Neuralink sort of thing where like you have a digital computer interfacing with you and like, okay, it's going to read your brainwaves and decide, you know, how to kind of like port into your brain as if we were some kind of like, you know, as if our brain worked like the internet. Like, no, the idea would be much more like, well, find the network topology that underlies the problem and then create specialized hardware that actually also has that network topology that, you know, it has as many neurons and in the same, essentially, like, you know, spatial temporal frequency, and let the body and brain learn how to use it, right? Like, I think like that, you know, and the trick here is actually going to be with these phenomenological tools, you know, figure out, hey, like, what is the network topology to use? That is, I think, like the key bottleneck. And most people, yeah, have no idea that this is something you could do even in principle. Now, the last couple things I'm going to walk you through, and I'm going to be pretty fast in the interest of time, is some research, you know, moving forward. You know, so far, I've shown you things that, in some sense, are like kind of like fairly analog, you know, very, okay, like classical, you know, mechanics, you could imagine. Well, electromagnetism is part of classical physics, but it is like field behavior more specifically. We have like some research specifically, yeah, also in phenomenology and trying to tie essentially what happens in the brain and electromagnetic behavior to different things in phenomenology. For example, these to the right, people tend to agree that the waves are more like ketamine-like, whereas this is more kind of a DMT type of effect. And you can get these essentially by tweaking specific parameters of an electromagnetic model, in particular the index of refraction of the phenomenal objects of your world simulation. There's a lot more I could say about these. But another thing we're like fairly confident on is that one of the key ways in which your world simulation is created, I mean, this is completely crazy, but it seems to be the case, is through a process similar to cell animation. So cell animation is like, you know, how cartoons used to be made in the past, right? Like, you don't want to draw the background again and again and again, right? You want to like, okay, one prototype and then you modify the things that are like actually moving. On DMT, for example, it is very common for like something in your visual field to like appear and then disappear very briefly, as if there was one of these like layers there that when you passed a current through it, it became opaque very briefly. And these like cells actually like interact with each other. It's not only that, they can also like rotate. They can reference each other. There's another like crazy aspect of the computational power of something like a DMT experience is that the cells disappear, but then on top of that, they can have like lingering references to previous cells and be connected and resonating with other cells. On top of that, they're also holographic. In that, like, okay, like have like a little bit of parallax, but not that much parallax. I mean, like you may talk to a DMT entity, and it's like, okay, the DMT entity is very well rendered if I move my head like this, but if I move too much, oh gosh, it starts to break down. The simulation starts to break down because it's not rendered properly on the behind. It's like there's only kind of like a thin hologram that has a little bit of a parallax, but not the full range. They also like can clip with each other and interact with each other. So, you know, with all of these hints of, yes, good.
I had one get stuck to my phobia at one point, so I actually couldn't look away from it. It was just like following me around like that. It was a little goblin thing, it was going like that. It vanished eventually.
That's awesome.
Yes, cell animation elements can absolutely get stuck in your visual field. Very widely reported, in particular, the combination of pregabalin plus DMT, which somehow has some kind of like viscosity to the visual field that actually makes the cell animations get stuck. But that's something I want to explore and like really understand. You know, other like nonlinear optical elements like beam splitting, birefringence, TV stones. Oh yeah, I'll show you that in a second.
I have some.
Oh, you have some? Yes, please. Awesome. Beautiful. You know, if you put all of this together, this is my current guess actually of like how you get these like crazy, you know, recursive cell animation like DMT patterns is something we call, Indra's net via a nonlinear optical circuit. There's a whole, Qualia computing article, very, very recent. You know, with more time, I would walk you through the circuit and why we think each of these components are there. But the bottom idea is like, hey, DMT really feels that there's like a lot of entities commenting on your experience simultaneously. Of course, a lot of people use that as just straight up evidence that, hey, you're getting in contact with other entities. My default assumption here is that no, there is a shared kind of like workspace that is your access consciousness or the screen of consciousness, so to speak. And guess what? It is getting broadcasted to a bunch of different brain modules. Each of those brain modules has the entire copy. And then those brain modules work on, you know, the entire copy and modify them. For example, like applying, filters like high frequency, low frequency filters, and so on. And all of those are like nonlinear optics. I mean, it's like birefringence, diffraction, refraction patterns. And then, like a neural network, but with nonlinear optics, they get recombined for different purposes. So, like one brain module might be like a phase detecting module. And he's using the wisdom and the intelligence of the entire network to get there. And then all of these different kind of like post-processed versions of the screen get pulled together and then projected back onto the screen. Like that is the key thing. That's why it's so crazy. Because those reprojections of the entire screen back onto the screen can interact with each other. And you start getting kind of these really, really sophisticated, crazy, like recursive patterns that don't make sense unless you have like something like this going on. But this, by the way, like it kind of explains like, internal family systems, all of these views of like, hey, like we're made of a lot of different parts. The parts are like tricky because they're actually, I think, they're kind of like crazy network like this. If you're talking to somebody and like some part of you kind of says like, oh, like stop talking to them, or another says like, oh, make a funny joke or something like that. Think of it as like, those are like commentaries from each of these different streams. And we may have, like maybe 12 of them always on. And if you want like inner alignment or, like really kind of like have like a sense of like internal harmony, the thing you have to harmonize is those commentators, like who are like commenting on your experience. With that circuit, straight up, you can produce this type of patterns. I mean, this is like super basic using that type of circuit. And, this is very common on DMT, where like you have like a bunch of screens, and each of the screens has a copy, but through a linear or nonlinear transformation of the entire thing. And so you get that kind of this like endless repeating patterns, but it's not just recursion. It's like recursion plus parallelism and plus linear algebra on top of that. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than like, oh, it's just a bunch of mirrors. Like, no, there's something more specific here that is happening. And as far as I know, and I've looked quite carefully, nobody in psychedelic circles or otherwise has like proposed that particular circuit. But I think like that's really getting onto something. I'm gonna skip this, although these I'll just mention very quickly. This is a tool that we built in order to visualize four-dimensional rotations, because things can rotate in two ways at once in 4D. They cannot do this in 2D. And I've looked at these in legal contexts on all kinds of doses of DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, and you can actually experience four-dimensional consciousness. I mean, this sounds ridiculous, right? Like, but it would be a multi-hour presentation to like really convince you that like, no, this is not like, I got the impression that this is a higher dimensional thing. It's like, no, very, very clear signatures. Not only that, I mean, things such as like actually being able to rotate an internal representation in more ways at once simultaneously in a perfectly smooth ways. That happens if you look at these for like several minutes and like really tuning into the 4D-ness. Yes, Sasha?
I want to clarify, do you like experience a 4D space, or do you like experience some kind of like interdistant projection of it? Do you mean the high dimensional space in generalized sense?
I mean,
it's the actual 4D Euclidean space.
It is it's a very tricky subject, because you can experience 4D or higher dimensional spaces in a bunch of different ways and in a bunch of like interestingly like mixed ways. The one that this produces is one that I would call kind of like a hard 4D, which is not kind of like you squint your eyes and oh, this maybe is kind of like 4D. I actually mean like your world simulation acquires a new spatial depth through which internal representations can rotate. And I haven't actually been able to like make a good representation of that, but it is one of those things that like, yeah, I would love to be able to spend like a month with mathematicians and like really nail these down.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you can also, great talk by the way. You can also have fractional dimensions too. So
yes.
Higher dimensional fractional dimensions might be what we're seeing in some cases.
Yes. Cube.
Another technical question. So when I see something in 3D, I'm actually seeing basically a two-dimensional plus a depth projection of a three-dimensional object. So when you see this thing, are you seeing I guess like 3D plus sort of an extra dimensional projection of a four-dimensional
like
thing?
Technically what I'm actually reporting on is like something that is like 3.5D.
Yeah, okay.
So that is like, it's tricky. I mean, this is why like this is a multi-hour presentation really, if I really wanted to explain what's happening there. But I'm not making it up. I mean, like I remember I think Scott was pretty skeptical in one of his favorite articles. He's like, oh, I don't believe Andrés when he says he's seen 7-dimensional objects. But like, you know, I would really have to spend a bunch of time on that. Yes.
I have not seen this, but I would love to be able to verify that if we do another review.
Okay. I'm gonna move on. Okay, so the last part, I'm just gonna conclude with the budget and like kind of justifying why we're requesting such significant sums of money. Maybe not that significant in the context of other nonprofits and startups and so on, but for us it does feel a lot, but it is necessary. I will switch onto like a very sad topic, but it's very important because it has a very important, optimistic component to this, which is cluster headaches. So, look, why am I interested in these? So QRI really, obviously we're spending a lot of time mathematizing consciousness, doing psychedelic research. Why these like weird medical disorders? So for two reasons. First of all, we see ourselves at QRI as kind of like being the people who are actually kind of like trying to see the big picture. It's like, hey, if you had a Qualia scope, if you could actually see what everybody's experiencing and the texture of their experience, if you could actually know for a fact, what is the subjectivity of like a cow in factory farms and so on, that probably will inform your ethics, right? Like probably, like knowing that somebody is actually silently, having a panic attack when they look like, oh, they're just having fun. Like it probably should change, how you approach that person, right? And likewise for like intense happiness, right? So when I started doing this work, there's a particular piece of research called the logarithmic scales of pleasure and pain, very popular in the EA forums. I applied a bunch of different analytic techniques to identify the most pleasant and most unpleasant experiences and try to put a number on them. And one of the things that came up is that there was really substantial analytical evidence that the distribution of pain and pleasure is not linear. That as you move in the pain scale, the difference between 5 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 is not one feels twice as intense. We're talking about like one feels like 100 times or more intense than the other. There's a bunch of reasons, I'm not gonna get into the specifics, but all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, actually knowing this is almost kind of like there's this huge piece of information, and then I looked, okay, how are people in effective altruism prioritizing things? Well, they use something that's called like quality adjusted life years, maybe a mild improvement over something like just straight up years, but it doesn't distinguish between somebody who's just bored, and maybe their life is just not very valuable according to them, versus somebody who's in the innermost horrible ring of hell. Like there's just, it's like the metric doesn't show it. And so you have all of these really smart, altruistic, fantastic people who really want to help the world, but they just don't have the metrics that actually will allow them to see what is going on in the world, which I find enormously frustrating, but fixable. We've been fighting this fight for several years with some success. But yeah, one of the things that we found is that this kind of like long tail effect. I mean, if you look at avalanches per year in different countries, it's not a normal distribution, right? Like some countries have a huge number of avalanches and others have like zero. The same even for example, people with cluster headaches. The people who have the worst cluster headaches, they also have like exponentially more than the average person who suffers from them. So suffering is like really concentrated. That's an important thing to know, and it's extremely, extremely sad. But we've done, really diligent excavations of the literature, and then run all kinds of data science models on these, including, Monte Carlo simulations using, feeding our models with like data in the literature and interviews that we have run. And based on that, we have arrived at the conclusion that, hey, actually cluster headaches, just getting rid of cluster headaches would be a very significant percentage of the world's suffering. So we think that's actually really, really important. And for example, we just published this, thanks to Chris Percy, Alfredo Parra, Heavy Tales of Extreme Pain, Exacerbate Health Inequality. I don't know if this would be the sort of paper that we would stop receiving funding because it has the word inequality on it, but quite aside from that, it is a serious thing, but there is a hope. So I'm going to play this very quickly. I'm getting to the end of the presentation, and I swear I'm going to end in a very good note. So.
All right, so here our friend exactly, yeah, excellent. So yeah, basically DMT, the smallest dose, the smallest microdose of like maybe 5 milligrams with vape pen or whatever, stops the worst pain known that I ever had, a cluster headache, in literally 10 to 20 seconds for me. It stops an attack right away.
You said other things also?
Acid and mushrooms as well, but they take a long time to come up. That's why at some point I was using mushrooms and acid for a while, and then I was like, wait, DMT is also a treatment.
Yeah, so effectively, this is something I discovered in 2019. I was interviewing a bunch of people with cluster headaches. I almost burned out, by the way, I should mention that. Definitely be careful in terms of your level of exposure to intense suffering, especially, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, take care of yourself. I make perfumes for a hobby, I exercise, I really try to maintain a high level of happiness so that I can work on this in the long term. And I've seen a lot of people in effective altruism, for example, really burn out because of thinking so much about suffering. Very important. At the same time, there's very, 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 very few people, especially people who don't suffer from this condition, who are kind of advocating for it. And it turns out that DMT is a breakthrough therapy here. There's night and day. I mean, I've talked to the heads of Cluster Busters, the main organization in the world that tried to get rid of cluster headaches. They've tried, the founder tried 80 different, therapies, everything, beta blockers, antipsychotics, benzos, all, morphine, etc. Nothing worked. Except when he started experimenting with psychedelics, he's like, oh my gosh, actually taking psilocybin once a week or once every 3 weeks really makes an amazing difference. But it has a problem, it doesn't work that well, and also it takes a while to come. So if you have a sudden like cluster headache, all of a sudden, psilocybin will only help in half an hour to an hour. And that half an hour is already a massive, massive ethical emergency, I would say. Like it is, unbelievably bad. So it's called suicide headaches for a reason. So essentially, of the people we have interviewed, we are getting something along of like 80% success rate of people who say like, the smallest amount of DMT takes the pain from 10 out of 10 to like 1 out of 10 or 0 out of 10. There is some people for whom it doesn't quite work all that well. However, of the people for whom it hasn't worked, plurality, when we have instructed them better and kind of like counseled them, eventually it actually does work. And it turns out it was a matter of technique. Like, they weren't getting enough, or they weren't getting in the right way. So tomorrow we are launching clusterfree.org. It is one of the outputs of QRI. We consider as kind of like something that was incubated at QRI, now it's going to be its own thing. And effectively is like a worldwide open letter, also like national level, for people to sign up. And it's like this very basic things, but we're asking, these are some of the numbers. Like for example, right now, right this very second, there's like 70,000 people in the depths of hell just from cluster headaches. We think we can actually, we can bring that to close to zero, by 2035. We want, compassionate access, medical recognition, patent protection, expanded treatment, research support, insurance coverage, medical supplies. So, I'm going to take the following advice from Effective Altruism Global, EA Global. They did this very good, very sneaky thing, which is, they want you to fill out their survey at the very end, but they say, well, if we tell you to fill out the survey, like, 2/3 of you will forget. So, if you agree with this, please take out your phone and look up clusterfree.org. And I would like you to sign the global letter right now. I'll give you a couple minutes. And so we're doing this push so that by tomorrow, there's a lot of amazing, brilliant people here, a lot of people respect, and we would love to have your support. And also the extra thing. The extra recommendation is, if you can think of a friend, a doctor, somebody prestigious, somebody who is very compassionate, I would also recommend to send them this link today and ask them to sign today.
The verification email went to my spam in case anyone's looking for the.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you for the note. I'm almost done, but yes, I'll give you just 1 more minute to finish this.
The link from the email is struggling to load.
Okay.
body and my heart chakra today.
Yeah.
Is it you on Thursday? Is that what we're doing?
Works for me.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Just 30 more seconds, and then I'll wrap up. I'm close to done.
Yeah, I had to click on it again, and then it worked.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Like this here?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the thing. Of course, there's a lot of stuff we will be doing at QRI, but yeah, one of the things, very key thing of my January is, so there's this retreat center in Mexico, Yulucina Retreat. Is the only place in the world where they're actually using psychedelics for headache disorders. They're specialized in that. I went like last year, took the time to spend there like a number of days. Got like, for example, 2 interviews with the founder. You can see them on online. Really interesting, very insightful interviews. I would argue, especially getting her perspective on the path she took from like essentially, yeah, like getting a disorder herself and then becoming a founder of this retreat and fully curing it with psilocybin in her case. But here you find myself, you find a picture of me that she took. I didn't know she was taking this picture, where I am kind of like after, this is after taking a lot of DMT, again in a legal setting, I should say. And essentially, yes, I was thinking like, okay, why does DMT work? Why is it such a powerful thing for cluster headaches? And okay, there's like my best guess from a prosaic kind of a intellectual QRI type of models perspective, which has to do with the particular like deep patterning that happens on DMT. And I was talking to a lot of the participants, a lot of the people who were getting relief, and it really does seem that a key essential aspect of getting the relief with DMT is actually like this powerful body vibration, like this like 30 hertz body vibration. But it doesn't always happen and not with the same intensity, but if it happens, like for everybody for whom that vibration was happening, they were getting their cluster headaches relieved. There is also an esoteric interpretation that I will share just because I figure some of you may be curious about this. Very low credence, but hey, I will share it regardless, which is taking DMT in that environment and with kind of like the pure intention of like really understanding how this works. I was put in contact. I mean, the hallucinations, big epistemic warnings here. I don't know the ontological status of this, but essentially the semantic content of the experience was getting in touch with these kind of like Buddha super consciousnesses in a type of like pure land, where what they were communicating to me quite clearly was, well, what is happening is that over here we are overflowing in compassion and intelligence and energy and power. And when somebody takes DMT having a cluster headache, we can actually access their energy body, and we go and take and unfold the electromagnetic field, which is a gnarl, because we bodhisattvas have actually the capacity to unfold the electromagnetic field in the right way. And that is why people report it as being so magical and so incredible, have like something happens to the field and they're getting all of these kind of angelic effects, and all of a sudden the cluster headache is gone. I don't know if this is true, right? But what I was really meditating at the time is like, okay, what is, almost kind of in Dune, thinking through the quantum multiverse, like what is the fastest path we can take so that we can actually get to like 0 cluster headaches, by 2035. And I have a hunch that maybe this meeting is part of the things that are manifesting along the way. So thank you for being part of the quantum branch where this is happening. So the last thing, this is just an activity and this is just to pull our energy. So you may know from Dragon Ball Z when there's like this monster that you cannot defeat in any other way, right? Like Goku learns this thing called the Genkidama. So he says like, we call for the energies of the universe to pull the energy to be able to have enough of it to be able to actually defeat this monster. So I want you to, for those who want to do this, you don't have to. Of course, this is there's nothing forced or anything. But if you feel like it, let's spend like 1 minute in silence, just kind of like thinking about all of the people who we can help, all the people trapped in hell who nobody listens to them for whom there's actually already solutions. There might be somebody next door with a DMT vape pen. They just don't know they could actually do that. They could go to a psytrance festival. Like, this is a solvable problem. So let's all as a group call out the energies of the universe and build a reservoir of energy so this problem is taken care of by smart, well-meaning, benevolent forces with our best interest in mind. Then we take all this energy and we hand it out to the benevolent forces and intelligence that is working on this. Purity of intention and benevolence. Loving kindness, metta. May all beings be free from suffering. May those who are trapped in hell find relief. No. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, to wrap up. Next year we're gonna spend 2 months in Tepoztlán, these beautiful mountains. The geology is actually completely unique. My grandfather used to tell me about how this is constructed. I'm happy to tell you one-on-one the mechanics behind these type of mountains. And we're going to be exploring several things. I mean, yes, as you know, exploring 5-MeO DMT, the nonlinear optical stuff. Also, we're going to do like a jhana retreat, specifically aiming towards the formless jhanas. We're going to have various people who are really adept meditators and trying to use their wisdom and then create software tools to essentially replicate the actual phenomenology of the formless jhanas. And hopefully making some strides in figuring out actually what awakening is. And this is the path of awakening according to one particular person who has experienced it, Roger Teasdale, part of our network. He went to the Canada retreat. He talks about kind of this unfolding of the structure of attention that starts from a subject in the center of your head to eventually becoming having a no self and no centerless field of consciousness. Daniel can tell you more about that. But yes, I mean, there seems to be some kind of progression towards what happens in phenomenology. And awakening is no joke. I mean, people who really, make strides in this direction say their suffering is substantially less, right? It really would help a lot the world if we can figure out ways to accelerate awakening. So we want to formalize this and put it, in mathematical forms, create simulations, create all of the ways in which we can actually formalize it. So just very quickly, the Q1 plan of 2026, Ulocena retreat. By the way, yes, Matthew over there, he's actually a sufferer, unfortunately, of migraines and more recently clusters, and he's going to be joining me in the retreat. And he's volunteered to map his brain in the middle of an attack, actually, and see how it looks like on DMT, whether he gets relief from it or not. So, just to kind of emphasize, all of the work of QRI is not just kind of intellectual and interesting, but no, there's there's a groundwork in terms of actually doing the work, as it were. Frontier Tower, actually, we want to have a location here as well, so that we can be, form the proper alliances, the network to actually have the the reservoir computing needed for all of these projects. Yes, jhana visualization contest. This is coming up. We haven't announced it, but we did, a psychedelic visualization contest. So if you can access the jhanas, or people who have, there's going to be, money prizes for these. If you can make really accurate artistic or technical descriptions of what it's like to enter the third jhana, the realm of incredible peace, For example, like, yes, we will judge it. Actually, we will judge it in the retreat. As we access the jhanas, we will be using the people who have direct access to the jhanas in the moment to rate these animations. So hopefully it actually will be kind of a breakthrough in like visualizing meditation in a useful way. We're going to release the Tactile Visualizer 2.0. That has like very significant therapeutic applications. As I mentioned, we believe that we can accelerate pain diagnosis, enormous applications, as well as its treatment. Later, several conferences, Tepoztlan. By the way, if you are a significant donor of QRI and we're paying that at $10,000 or more, you get an automatic spot in one of these retreats. Especially the Tepoztlan one of the things that is going to be really cool is, we're going to be working on all of these technologies, and the last week of that event will be actually more of a like party oriented, actually like taking all of these different methods and neurotechnology and so on, and actually creating kind of like what would a museum/festival combining all of these technologies look like, and hopefully incentivizing bigger donations too, so that people they know, hey, you have a spot in here. There's not going to be many spots, so definitely think about that. On the topic of fundraising. We have all of the QRI perfumes over there. Most of them are pretty accessible, like $10 or so. We also have a Hedonium Shockwave, 3 milliliter bottles. That one costs $1,000 per bottle. I spent like 2 months really optimizing it for my maximum pleasure. Of course, this is a fundraiser. Of course, it's not worth that much objectively, but subjectively. I will say though that Hedonium Shockwave is in limited supply. There is a hard real world reason why there's only so much that is possible to make, and that is because there is a very important ingredient of it, and I'm not going to tell you which one, that used to be produced in kind of this like boutique, mom and pop, essential oil producing farm in France, in Provence, I don't know how you... Provence, yes. They're famous for their super high quality oils, and there's one that was like really next level, extremely rare, and there's no more of it ever because that factory closed. So Hedonium Shockwave is in limited supply. There's not going to be more of it ever made, which hopefully gives us a sense of like, okay, you have like a piece of the of the Hedonium that's not going to be made ever again. Like June, inviting friends to the QRI Tepoztlan party. Borderland, we're going to be displaying like nonlinear optical simulations there and gathering data as well. Modem Festival. Modem is actually like one of the most technically proficient places in terms of kind of like psychedelic replications and visualizations and psytrance and so on. So we want to have like a solid presence there. And on top of that, use the fact that it's a festival to collect very high quality data. Another Heart DMT tryptamine tryptamine retreat in September. Tryptamine cohort 2 in October. And then a Valence conference. We haven't decided exactly the name of this, but it's gonna be something along the lines of the universe is all you need. You guys know like attention is all you need. I mean, essentially, yes, like if you're tapping you're tapping into these self-organizing principles of physical systems for compute, right? You're actually using the universe. That's what we believe actually the brain is doing, is tapping into the self-organizing principles of the universe itself, and that's why we're so smart. So the universe is all you need. And then yes, December publish clean data sets from retreats, festivals, and release the 2026 findings and technology and prepare for 2027. So essentially happy to go over, like the budgets and so on, but we're aiming for 1.5 million. Of course, this is going to be recorded as well and put online. But if you're interested in making a sizable donation, there's also like additional incentives. I'll be very happy to provide like one-on-one. We're very serious about this. We do think we're very cost effective, as I argued, relative to, let's say, like academic psychedelic research. They would be using this amount of money to publish one paper that probably wouldn't advance the field very much. We would be publishing, like dozens and doing, field work, and on top of that, creating the network, right? Like donating to QRI, any substantial donation to QRI is really a way of joining the network, joining this adventure, and like really making an extraordinary impact in the world. You know, the best, of course, is if you can like contribute materially in terms of research. Of course, like joining on a team, that's like the top in terms of like your contributions. You can volunteer, of course, but some people don't have the time for that. Some people don't have the skills, but they can always donate, right? Like and donating really goes a very long way. So with that, I want to conclude and thank you so very much. You know, most of you probably don't know each other very well, but I strongly encourage you, please make connections, put the connections on your phone, you know, text each other. There's an unbelievable amount of intellectual capital in this group over here. And you may not know you're actually sitting right next to like a really extraordinary person. So this is not any kind of like random gathering. So absolutely, please meet each other. And yes, we have a Discord. Of course, I'm active on Twitter. Maybe some of you know that. And yes, we're gonna essentially have like a donor network. Anybody who makes a substantial donation becomes part of the donor network, and we're gonna be cultivating that, you know, like really bringing you along in terms of like joining the adventure. And onwards, infinite bliss, let's get rid of suffering, and thank you so much, everybody. Woo! So the last part, I'm going to take a couple questions, like literally just 2 or 3. The last part of the evening, in terms of like programming, is anybody who wants to introduce yourself to the rest of the team, please form a line, and you're going to have like a couple minutes to say like who you are, what is it that you want, who do you want to connect with, and in that way, you know, kind of like a one-to-all. Okay, Sasha.
Yeah, I have a question. So with all the experiments with 5 million DMT and valence, and I'm not sure this question makes sense, but what do you think is like the default valence of consciousness? Is it like neutral, is it negative, is it positive?
Wonderful question. So I do have the intuition that actually the default, kind of like the bulk of the universe is probably like quite pleasant for a number of reasons, but essentially combed large field lines in the field that loop around with the right kind of like field topology in principle would feel really good. And essentially a lot of the universe is like that. So I would think like by default experience is very pleasant, but in organisms like us, it can recruit the very unpleasant parts for computation. Yes?
If we want to keep filming, can I just have 2 seconds to swap the SD card out?
Oh yes, please. Thank you.
Other minds is something that we can observe and study?
Yes.
Or do you believe that certain things, like the hard problem of consciousness, are outside of the scope and purview of empiricism entirely?
Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, we're radical epistemological optimists. So we actually have, you know, a lot of the things that haven't yet made it into peer-reviewed publications, but you can find in blog posts, even like old blog posts from 2016, 17, is we have like a lot of like original methods for example, testing the consciousness of other beings, involving sophisticated methods such as like mind melding and phenomenal puzzles.
So you think it's tractable?
Oh, absolutely. Even the hard problem, even the question, why is there something rather than nothing, we believe is actually answerable. And you can actually know the answer experientially in the right state of consciousness. I'd be happy to talk at length at that, but like, there's very few questions for which I don't have like some level of optimism, but there's actually like an angle of attack. But they tend to be very tricky ways sometimes. Yeah. Yes. Good.
Is the state space of consciousness, in your view, practically or maybe more than practically infinite or endless?
No.
Okay.
A very quick argument. So the reason why the state space of consciousness is not infinite is, first of all, there is probably a maximum binding window. So like, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure that you can have like, I'm not sure, but I suspect you can probably create a brain the size of a building and it'd still be able to kind of create a supermassive experience that is unified. I don't think you can do that with something the size of the solar system. For, you know, speed of light reasons, or like, you know, thermal quantum entanglement reasons, or like, you know, the topology of the electromagnetic field is unstable because of like physical instabilities due to gravity. There's very likely a maximum window of which is how large an experience can be. So that was like one constraint. But then you could still say, well, sure, maybe there's like a maximum size of an experience, but aren't there like an infinite number of variations within it? And the answer is also no, because you have just noticeable differences. In other words, if you take a particular moment of experience as you treat that as a data point in the state space, there isn't kind of like infinitely, you can't do analysis on it. It's like, oh, for every epsilon there is, a delta, for every delta there's an epsilon for which. Why not? Because when you get sufficiently close, they become indistinguishable. So essentially you can actually kind of like discretize the state space of consciousness, and it's bounded in both ways, right, in terms of resolution and size. So the answer is, there is a finite number of possible experiences. It's extremely large.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say,
It's finite in the same sense that like a Googleplex is finite, right?
Okay.
Yes.
When you were talking about next year,
Yes.
September, it mentioned that you guys were focused a little bit on nonlinear optical computing and qualia computing.
Yeah.
Is there anything specific that you guys are focusing on next year when it comes to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing to massively unpack. But like, I mean, for example, Cube Flipper talked about the fractional Fourier transform, for example, which is like one thing that you can do really efficiently in terms of optics at the low level. But there's so many others. There's like a family of low-level nonlinear optical circuits that produce things such as like self-focusing or second harmonic generation, the Kerr effect, and the things that Hugh was mentioning. So what we're planning on building is like, okay, looking at, for example, like the four-dimensional object on DMT and seeing like the self-focusing effect, writing software to replicate it, and then building, in analog form, how do you hook together these like nonlinear optical circuits in order to replicate that effect? Mm-hmm. The ideal dream, would be able that we can actually have like a device that like can easily show like, yeah, you tweak this parameter, and the thing itself actually, the visuals that it produces is actually DMT-like. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, okay, you three and that's it. So yes.
If consciousness is fundamentally embodied and there's a lot of biological diversity, how do you plan on comparing the conscious experiences of diverse biological substrates?
Yeah. As I mentioned, the concept of distillation, like our experience is complex, but it's not infinitely complex. And I mean, similar to like in data science, right? Like when you have a lot of data points, they're like 1,000 dimensions. Is this ever tractable? Well, you can do principal component analysis and at least try to figure out what is driving the first three components. Similarly, like with a tactile visualizer, right? Like when I'm showing like this type of behaviors, the number of possible self-organizing principles that emerge out of oscillatory dynamics is finite. And so I do suspect, for example, various kinds of like a panic attack, for example, might have to do with, okay, the synchronization of the oscillations in your stomach, the gut kind of like oscillatory modes and the brain are misaligned, and you're getting these chaotic patterns. That is complex in phenomenology, but simple in the generator. And likewise, I do suspect, okay, like autism versus, ADHD versus, like schizophrenia, they probably are like oscillatory disorders on different levels of the stack. And so like we hope also via epistemological optimism that we can account for that. It's like, okay, this person in the team might be, have like be on the spectrum. In what way are the oscillatory dynamics different? And we think like it's a tractable problem, but it is true that if you don't account for that, you're gonna get crazy results. Yes, okay.
I really love your like radical optimism approach. I think it's really, really beautiful. One thing I'm wondering is like, I only like just learned about this maybe like this week, so it's not my area of expertise, but I know that you subscribe to, or at least are inspired by David Pearce's
yes.
Zero Ontology. So one thing I wonder is like, when you're looking at this scale where you have these two massive tails of valence and,
yes.
and you can graph them on this two-dimensional plane, right? To me, what I see is like the symmetry of that, right? And I'm wondering like, okay, in what way, if any, does valence
yes.
map onto this idea of the zero ontology?
Yeah. Super great question. So some aspects of consciousness are invariant and some are not. So think about it this way, like zero ontology, but for those who don't know, is this idea that like it all adds up to zero in some sense. Like the reason there's something rather than nothing is because everything put together adds up to some kind of superposition of all possibilities, which itself has like zero information content. And the truth is that there's zero information content, but as a consequence, we exist. Completely crazy, but there's interesting, there's some reasons to think like there might be something there. Physicists talk about like, from the quantum vacuum, you get like emergence of particles, antiparticles, things cancel out in some ways. you can say like, okay, yes, the total electric charge of the universe is 0. But is the total number of triangles in the universe 0? No, because you can make a triangle, and that triangle did not exist before. So think of it similarly to kind of like if you have like an orchestra that is like constantly producing the same volume, but sometimes it is in tune and sometimes it's out of tune, you can say, okay, the total energy output of the orchestra is constant, but the harmony is not constant. In other words, there are branches in the universe where we all figure out how to be in perfect bliss all the time, and it doesn't add up. So like, once you take everything into account, the total valence of the universe doesn't add up to 0.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, last question.
Okay. I have a question about, I guess, what sort of maybe targeted interventions do you see being possible in the future? Like, if taking DMT for cluster headaches is sort of like a global intervention, what about something like the equivalent of a pacemaker?
Yes.
That's sort of maybe between Neuralink or, some kind of VR headset that like strobes you with a certain frequency?
Yes.
As for like, I guess that's my question.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm trying to point out here, which is that, like, let's say, like, you identify, like, hey, like, the problem is, like, the kernel of oscillation in your vascular system, and, like, DMT corrects that. You can totally create a prosthetic that essentially is providing that function. And so the idea, or let me give you another example, is like, let's say pain. I don't know if, I didn't put one of visualization of pain here, but, like, let's say, like, an unpleasant part is kind of, okay, that you're having these, like, there's some asymmetries here, like, for example, it's like, maybe the person feels a little bit, like, tense here because the waves don't travel very well. Rather than like either kind of like blasting it with like noise or like you're taking an opiate or something like that, you could potentially add a very specific type of pattern, precisely kind of like a pacemaker but more sophisticated, where what you do is like, okay, something we're calling a valence assist is like, hey, your body is trying to do this synchronization in this way, but the coupling constant is just not strong enough to actually get that coherence to happen. Can you boost that coupling constant from the outside a little bit, and then is less you're inducing a pattern and more just boosting the body's natural way of actually self-organizing and arriving to that attractor. So yes, I mean, essentially that is kind of, that is the vision. And we think that is the probably most promising application precisely of things such as, like extropic type of circuits, things that are like, using the actual thermodynamics of the universe.
Hope it doesn't get hacked.
There is a lot to talk about that. Yeah, no, well, with some of these, if it's like analog, for example, it's like it might not be like connected to the internet, for example. Like it's just like, hey, like you're how to put it this way is like, it's like if you see like a dune, like dune, and like you see like these avalanches in the sand and so on. It's like, of course you can like go there and like try to move it, but like the point is like, well, if you have like one of these chips embedded in you, and the thing that it's doing is actually just physics. It's not connected to the internet. It has no external ports. It's just designed in such a way that the body will actually use it. I mean, maybe there's like some way of hacking it, and of course, we want to look into that. But yeah, by default, these would be one of the least hackable things you could essentially do. Completely different than Neuralink, which I think is like massive exposure to the cesspool of the internet. If you ever collect, you don't want to expose your brain to that. But
Twitter directly into the brain.
Yeah, no, you don't. No. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, yes, one more question. Yes.
I was curious if you came at it with sound healing in conjunction with an enhancement of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have a video you can find on YouTube, which is titled Exploratory Haptic Research at QRI, where we essentially map the state space of possible vibrations and audio effects you could use in order to accelerate kind of like meditation states. And there's a lot of information we identified, like specific waveforms, specific frequencies, parts of the body. And in general, yes, I mean, like the full kind of like therapeutic, suite contains body vibration and electric current and audio and actual vibrating objects in front of you and a VR immersion. Like, the more elements you put together, if you know what you're doing, right, like the more the surface area is to your body, and you can actually essentially, maybe correct some of these self-organizing principles that are going wrong. Okay, so yes, just transitioning to the last part, and of course, if you want to just chat with others or anything, if you want to check out the perfumes, they're in that corner. If you want to chat while other people present, that's totally fine. Just I would request like to move over there to kind of like clear the sound a little bit. But yes, if anybody wants to introduce yourselves to the group, like now is the time. Here's the mic.
Hey, my name is Gabe. I make a lot of music, and I feel very
like intuitively attuned to audio generally, more broadly. And I have a bunch of cards in here, a bunch of cards to my works, and I feel ready to, I feel like I've just built up a lot of material and skills, and I'm ready to use it for something real, so.
How's it going? I'm Zan. Hopefully the space here on this floor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks y'all for coming. It's the perfect event for the perfect topics that we love. So yeah, if you like topics like these and want to do more big, small, formal, informal, come chat with me, and we like doing this stuff. So come get involved. Yeah.
Mic check. I'm a freestyle artist, so I thought I'd bust a freestyle if I could get a word from each of you. Just joking. My name's Matthew Gamble. I'm with Sensoria Research Incorporated. We're a nonprofit research organization based here in the Bay. We host a couple annual retreats over in Portugal, or did this calendar year. Andrés was at our last one, October 1 through 6, and just had an incredible time. We're mapping human consciousness, and we also have a presence here on this floor. So thank you, QRI, epic evening tonight, and thank you to those that I have met already. Would love to chat with more of you. Blessings on the day.
Hello, I'm Alton. I want to meet more people who like your work and who want to experience more of that work here together. Whether that may be 5MEO or other experiences you want to have in the Bay. I love to take people on underground adventures and meet other people who are doing deep dives in this work.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll be leaving in like 10 to 20-ish minutes, so please find me soon. Or if you want to have your movement amplified, let me know and I'll record it as well.
Wonderful evening tonight, Andrews. It's really nice to be here. And the issue man, Daniel, just told me he was coming out, 2 days ago. And I'm like, well, I now live in Reno, so I'll come down and introduce myself a little bit, person to person. But I'm Keith Zimmerman, and I come here through the meditative perspective, and resonate with the descriptive work that you've done at QRI, and have similar views relative to arising visionary aspects of hallucinogenic or altered states of consciousness. And I believe perhaps that they tie to aspects of connecting to consciousness, which is much further beyond, our individual state and a brain phenomena, but some type of mind that goes beyond, which enables things such as remote viewing or anything that's accessing information that can't otherwise be explained. I'm just recently completed working with a foundation that built a monastery in Mustang Valley in Nepal, which is a Bon practice that does Dzogchen meditation. And one of the things they do in Dzogchen is they enter into elevated states of consciousness and have visioning experiences, not at all, and it's dissimilar to what you see in the hallucinogenics. And we're looking at opening up a dark retreat in the Sacred Valley there, which has, historical lineage and traditions that have practices that enable these visions to develop, much like Daniel's Fire Cassini, the dark retreats will catalyze hallucinogenics, or visions similar to what you're seeing in the hallucinogenics. So anyway, there'll be opportunities for anybody who's familiar with the Annapurna circuit. They'll be passing by a beautiful monastery there, and we'll be having dark retreat there in not too distant future. And I actually used your work in a presentation, as I said, in Bhutan at a seminar, which was well attended. And I used your categorization of visions to kind of, show an analog to that, which they do in deep meditation. So anyway, it was well received too. Anyway.
Thank you.
My name is Tyler. I've hallucinated various things since I was a child and kind of was like transplanted sort of myself. I left home when I was 21 and moved to the Bay Area, and I was, you know, in, what's the word? I don't want to say exposed, but like I was shown psychedelics, and it's been mind opening, and I've had these experiences even without them ever since, and learning about just searching the things that I've experienced have brought me answers, and I'm continually doing that process to find a solution and answers to my experiences.
A couple more people.
Yeah. Hey everyone. I'm Ahmed. I'm a software engineer. I also used to be like some research in neurophysics actually. So this is like very interesting, like the oscillator models you shared. I have many questions about that. But yeah, it's like just want to say like it's very interesting to like have a group of people like with this shared interest. Like I'm interested in like mind uploading brain simulation in general. So yeah, it's just like not one of the not the type of community that I found sort of like on the ground or like offline. So this is probably like the first event this kind for me. So thanks guys for organizing this. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Andrés.
Yes.
Much love, brother. Heck yeah. Awesome. So I think I'm very pumped to work with everybody, including Andrés, to solve world suffering. That is a mathematically relevant and quantifiable problem. I do agree. I think it has to do with entropy in the nervous system, and there's many ways to quantify pain to a decent amount. Hey everyone, my name is Deep Assad. My background is in quantum artificial intelligence. I started and sold one of the world's first quantum computing companies about a year ago. I've also done a lot of work in space, and space exploration is my current sort of passion, if you will. And I am very interested in figuring out faster than light travel. I also have a theory of everything called Runeversic. Runeversic resurgence theory is the full name of it. And it's basically based on the idea of treating space-time and consciousness on equal footing. So not like David Chalmers necessarily, where we treat consciousness as fundamental, and not necessarily like the other extreme of reductionism, but somewhere in the middle, where what I've been playing with was basically adding another tensor, which I call the consciousness tensor, to the Einstein field equations. And by adding this extra tensorial equation, I found that I was able to resolve really interesting paradoxes in quantum mechanics. So if anyone's interested in figuring out, talking about space-time and consciousness and how they seem to be equivalent, here to talk about that.
Are you a functionalist?
I am neither.
All right, we should chat.
Would love to, yeah, absolutely.
Hello everyone, my name's Amber. I'm the fairy godmother of the Frontier Tower. So I make everyone's wishes come true, but first I make my own come true because you gotta take care of the vessel. I'm going to be throwing like monthly events starting in January that are non-alcoholic raves. So I think that we should talk, and I want to have like people that are believing in the same thing I am, because what I'm trying to do is help people with addiction and that do substances that bring them down to lower frequencies, help them explore other things. So yeah, thank you guys, and thank you for this. It was amazing.
Okay, just a couple more. Yes.
My name is Paul. I go by Social on Twitter. I've known Andrés probably for about 4 years now. I've been obsessed with his research. Mostly, the most interesting thing that he talks about to me is this concept of non-linear optical computers, And so for the people that out there that don't speak, Andrés speak, he basically just means the idea of a real conscious computer, something that actually could recreate the electromagnetic structure of our brain. And I think that is very, very, very interesting, and one of the most interesting things that he talks about to me. And so I love, all of QRI's research. But to me, like, where this is all headed is that, like, we are eventually going to recreate consciousness. We're eventually going to replicate it, through a machine version of it. And to me, I look at what's happened with artificial intelligence recently. It seems very clear to me, like, we did not solve intelligence before we created some artificially intelligent system. And so I think, a big thing that I'm excited to see over QRI over the next few years is, like, what comes first, like a true coherent, definition of consciousness, or an artificially conscious machine? That's the big question to me. So, appreciate you guys.
A quick note, I do have to note this, which is it's part of QRI's ethical commitment, in fact, to ensure that the first conscious computer is actually based on information-sensitive gradients of bliss. In other words, we specifically are trying to figure out how to use happiness for computation in order to prevent, essentially creating like a legacy system in such a way that anybody who builds a conscious computer will actually be using pleasure for computing instead of using suffering. And yeah, this is like philosophy with a deadline, so we have to get this right.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan. I'm a fourth-year undergrad student at University of San Francisco, studying architecture. And I discovered Andrés' YouTube channel through the hyperbolic geometry of DMT experiences, because I was watching YouTube late at night and I was like, I'll watch this. But yeah, it ended up being super interesting, and now I'm doing a thesis for my senior year, and it's very QRI inspired, and actually very symmetry theory of valence inspired. So yeah, so right now I'm trying to see how far I can extend the symmetry theory of valence beyond the sort of the boundary of consciousness, and see, how much I can pull on that thread, how much I can kind of fit that onto a theory of architecture. I also love your harmonic societies lecture on YouTube. That was super, super awesome. And I want to do something similar to that for architecture, but it's a very, very interesting, very, very deep topic, because it's kind of like the intersection of consciousness and the material world. It's like we're taking the material world and then we're putting it in the shape of our consciousness, and we don't even know what that shape is. So yeah, it's like double difficult. But anyway, yeah, I'm super happy to be here and meet all of you guys. And yeah, thank you.
Hi y'all, my name is Ellie Benjamin. I'm a lecturer in philosophy of mind and perception at UC Berkeley. I have a research problem for you. Okay, so our visual system has two kinds of visual abilities. We have high-level vision and low-level vision. The low-level vision processes the raw visual sense data of our environment, and then our high-level vision interprets the content of that raw visual sense data by attributing a concept or a property to it. Here's my problem. Autistic people have deficits in high-level vision. That's why we have deficits in predictive processing on a Bayesian model of predictive processing. And so we have overly specific prior probabilities about the world. And this needs to be fixed, but the people at the high-level vision lab, like Yanis, the postdoc at the high-level vision lab, good friend, he says that psychedelics can only break our high-level vision. It can only make the problem worse. It can't make it better. What I need y'all to think about is whether you have experiences in your experimentations, I'm not going to ask you here what they are, about whether we can have the reverse result, improve our high-level vision, not break it. I want to improve the high-level vision, not break it. So I don't know how to do that. I need your help.
I recommend you read the blog post I wrote about ketamine, WD-40 in the Bayesian brain, and the visual phenomenology of ketamine, because I find ketamine downregulates the weighting of priors. At least that's what I think is going on. I think the squares there's a lot of detail in there. And you can notice this visually. Like, you see, like, things turn into stuff on ketamine. The structure of objects, like, its rigidity decreases until objects are almost no longer recognizable.
You see vibes, gestalts?
No, I basically see like a visual fields devoid of semantic content.
That's not going to make me neurotypical.
I'm not promising to make you neurotypical.
This is still really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to check it out. Thank you so much. I'm going to try.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to say to you that ketamine induces production of brain activity. So come and find me and I'll give you some research.
Will do. Thanks, y'all.
All right. Well, this concludes the structured part of the evening. I'm gonna be hanging around. Feel free to come over if you have questions. I'm gonna try interesting things in my computer or whatever. But yes, thank you so very much, everybody, for coming. And yes, let's make it happen. Woo!